violence and other kind of violence.
Get away! I could be at work, at school, in my car, and I can still get shot by the police. But I can get shot anywhere.
So it is what it is.
I'm here on the corner of MLK and Medgar Evers, and it's a very tranquil scene compared to just a couple hours ago where a drive-by shooting just took place. Excuse me, I'm getting live updates as we speak. I've just been updated to the amount of casualties from this drive-by shooting, and I'm getting reports that 2 people were actually declared deceased and 27 others were shot and injured, but are in stable condition. And although we must pray for the families of the fallen, we must also praise God for the aim of the super gremlin. If you want to know more about the victims of this crime, make sure you add BGZM News 17 on Patreon at www.patreon.com/blackgenzmindset. Also, don't forget to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and comment on the video to continue the discussion on how we can find solutions to all this gun violence in the streets. For more hard-hitting news coverage from the community, by the community, I'm Jenquavius Jackson, here live, reporting from Atlanta, Georgia, BGZM News 17.
To police, the woman.
And cut.
All right, dog.
Make sure you go ahead and like,
out of
comment,
here for
share,
these niggas come
subscribe.
back.
Let's get into the video.
Whoa.
Yo,
Whoa.
ain't that nigga J?
Nah, that ain't me. That ain't me.
He just went live
That
with
ain't
that
me.
funky ass suit on.
That's that nigga. That's not me.
Hey, get that nigga.
Jenquavius Jackson, here live, reporting from Atlanta, Georgia. Pray for me.
According to police, the woman identified as 57-year-old Marita Howell was stabbed to death at the home yesterday. Connections at Metropolitan UMC's website lists Harrell as the senior pastor of the church.
So we have a pastor of the church found stabbed to death in the A. Guys, and when they tell you how she or why she kind of she was killed, stabbed to death, you're gonna be like, dang. But if the super gremlins are out here killing pastors, there is no hope.
She was visiting the home as a part of her outreach efforts for individuals who'd recently gotten out of prison. They say after.
So she was trying to help ex-cons in some type of outreach program, and no good deed goes unpunished in the community. That's pretty much what it is. There is no outreach. There is, like, you can't save these dudes, bruh. You can't. The recidivism rate, it's 85%, meaning only 15% of the people turn from their ways and don't reoffend. So if somebody is out on a violent crime and then you just gonna like take them in as if they're your child, man, look, Buddy straight snuffed her out
of prison. They say after the suspect killed her, he dumped her body about 10 minutes away.
A crook tries to steal a contractor's truck right in front of him. It happened on Rocky Ford Road in Northeast Atlanta.
Damn, she's so fine. Like the waist, she on point. I ain't gonna cap.
The attempted crime caught right on camera. Tonight, Fox 5's Christopher King speaks exclusively with the homeowners who couldn't believe what they were seeing.
That crook walks up and down this street. He jumps into a contractor's truck. He tries to drive off. He does all this right in the middle of the day, right under that contractor's nose.
Wow. So I told you how sneaky these super gremlins are. And then the brazenness in the middle of the day, like, it's getting bad out here, y'all. It's getting bad. Like, I don't think y'all really understand the gravity of the situation that we're dealing with. These super gremlins are on demon time.
Incredibly brazen.
You'd have to see it to believe it.
He was very bold without really any.
No. If I read it, I'd believe it too. Like, this happens so often. It's not a, oh, you have to see it till you believe it. No, I already believe it. It's a reality. It's like, it's so cemented that I'm just like, yeah, I get that. You know, makes sense. If he can just hop in and boom, take off right quick, you know, ain't no see it to believe it. This is the world we live in.
He worries about consequences.
This guy wearing a brown t-shirt and red pants a week ago.
Obviously sagging his pants too. These super sagging gremlins are on demon time.
Wednesday walks through Rebecca and Carnes Jackson's yard as contractors work on their roof on Rocky Ford Road in Kirkwood.
He just cruised right down our driveway like he lived here.
He walks out of frame up to this white pickup. Contractors working all around him.
We had easily 8 or 10 workmen on our roof in the yard. The neighbors had a crew of landscapers.
Bruh, the super gremlins feel like they're invincible, dog. Like, you got 8 to 10 men working in the area, and you think you just finna pull up and pull off, and nobody gonna touch you, nobody gonna say nothing to you, and if they do, what you gonna do?
Probably about the same amount of people.
The roofers walk into frame.
He got into the truck.
They're unaware someone is trying to swipe their truck.
The roofers didn't know he was in the truck.
A couple of minutes later, the contractors realize what's happening.
They went and snatched him out of the driver's side window.
The guy takes off running.
And then chased him down the street.
Neighbors.
Damn, he was fast as hell too. That boy was super fast. I would have caught him though. I would have caught him, but he fast. Watch this.
Tell Jackson he recently later, the contractors realize what's happening.
They went and snatched him out of the driver's side window.
The guy takes off.
God, that man hit a 4-3. 4-3 on him. He fast, bro. He came zipping through the damn camera.
Running.
And then chased him down the street.
Neighbors tell Jackson he recently stole at least another contractor's truck in the area.
We're definitely on high alert.
This APD crime map shows 19 reported cases of theft from a motor vehicle this year in the Kirkwood neighborhood, 11 reported cases of motor vehicle theft, and at least 2 cases of theft of motor vehicle parts.
And this is supposed to be a decent area off Edgewood, little 5 points. Like, guys, these super gremlins are on demon time.
Parts or accessories.
That is unnerving.
It's unclear if any of them are connected to this case.
He's a danger to people around here.
Jackson just wants this guy arrested.
It's not fair that someone like that can terrorize us.
Jackson says she filed a report with Atlanta police. We asked them if this theft is connected to other thefts of other contractors' trucks in the area. They say they'll get back to us. In Kirkwood, Christopher King, Fox 5 News.
I'm here on the corner of MLK and Medgar Evers, and it's a very tranquil scene compared to just a couple hours ago where a drive-by shooting just took place. Excuse me, I'm getting live updates as we speak. I've just been updated to the amount of casualties from this drive-by shooting, and I'm getting reports that 2 people were actually declared deceased and 27 others were shot and injured, but are in stable condition. And although we must pray for the families of the fallen, we must also praise God for the aim of the super gremlin. If you want to know more about the victims of this crime, make sure you add BGZM News 17 on Patreon at www.patreon.com/blackgenzmindset. Also, don't forget to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and comment on the video to continue the discussion on how we can find solutions to all this gun violence in the streets. For more hard-hitting news coverage from the community, by the community, I'm Jinquavius Jackson, here live, reporting from Atlanta, Georgia, BGZM News 17.
And cut.
All right, dog. Let's get the out of here before these niggas come back.
Whoa.
Yo, Ain't that nigga J?
Nah, that ain't me. That ain't me.
He just went live.
That ain't
with
me.
Funky ass that's that nigga.
That's not me.
Hey, get that nigga.
Just play these Jackson. Here live. Reporting from Atlanta, Georgia. Pray for me.
We're talking to a man who says he was kidnapped and robbed by his roommate. Police are looking for 29-year-old Joshua Deloach.
Dang. You getting robbed by a roommate? What he gonna do when he gotta come back to the crib? This is crazy. This is crazy, y'all. Now, this is one where, I'd have to see it to believe it. This right here, getting robbed by a roommate at gunpoint. I can understand if your roommate, went in your bathroom, took some toothpaste, or maybe you had a Subway sandwich you had in the fridge and then he went and ate, half of it. I could see that, but straight, yo, bro, run your pockets. Give me what you got. Like, come on, bro.
Hoping this video here will lead to tips on where he is.
Anayeli Ruiz talked with the victim about what he experienced.
She called.
Anayeli.
To the left.
Well, hey, guys, the victim tells us they lived together for over a year, and he believes this was all started after he fell behind on his rent. When he asked him to move out, that's when this incident occurred. It's dramatic video that shows the moment police say 29-year-old Joshua Deloach robbed his roommate Justin Uwuji at gunpoint.
I was in shock. I was confused. I was scared. I was nervous.
The ring cam.
Dang, Black lives don't matter, obviously. You getting robbed by your roommate, bruh. Come on.
Camera inside the townhome they shared with one other person shows the beginning of that traumatic night for Justin. You can hear Joshua clearly ask Justin to get on his knees.
Bro, on your knees now.
You can then see Joshua grab the victim's phone and then he unplugs the Ring camera.
He tosses me a blindfold, a bandana, and says, "Cover up your eyes."
Justin says they went to his room. He says the suspect took his gun, his Rolex, and even opened his cell phone and transferred $6,000 through a Cash App.
Dang. Dang, bruh. Be careful who y'all rooming with. He probably got a CPN too to get that apartment. Ain't no way he got it. If he doing hidden licks like that, ain't no way. Dang, bro. Hey, do not room with this. Don't room with him, but hey, man, it's tough. You might as well go ahead and get your own spot at that point. These super gremlins are on demon time.
And then he asked Justin to go to the shower.
He asked me something along the lines of, any last words or what do you have to say for yourself?
Oh, hell no. Dang, that is crazy.
Do you want to do this here or do you want to gamble? And I said, I guess gamble.
That's when Justin says the suspect covered his head, tied his wrists and ankles, and threw him in the back of his car.
This isn't right. And he just, told me to be quiet and continue to drive.
Wow. Straight terrorize this brother. Straight terrorize this brother. He ain't never gonna be the same. He ain't never gonna be the same. That's crazy.
They left his townhome east of downtown and drove to northwest Harris County. They stopped a few times, and during one stop, the suspect got out of the vehicle and left. Justin says he managed to free his fingers from the duct tape, pulled the tape off from his mouth, and then the bandana.
I'm waving, trying to wave and yell at the lady, but my car alarm is going off at this point. I managed to get the tape off of my ankles, and I just get up and I run.
Justin says he ran into traffic and managed to get a truck to stop.
Call 911. My roommate's trying to kill me.
Well, that person called police. Investigators were able to track down Justin's SUV, and now police have filed charges against 29-year-old Joshua Deloach.
Thank God. Jeez. I mean, do they have him in custody, though?
Justin believes on that horrible night, God answered his prayers.
The whole time I was just asking God, please get me out of this situation.
Now, Justin says he's known Joshua since 2016. They've never had any issues before this, he says, but he hopes that police are able to catch Joshua.
That's wild. He did the slow game on him. These super gremlins are on demon time
Soon. And by the way, there is a warrant out for his arrest. Mia, we'll send it back to you.
I wouldn't go back home if I was him.
Gang violence and other kind of violence.
Get away! I could be at work, you at school, in my car, and I can still get shot. By the police. I can get shot anywhere.
So it is what it is.
What's good, Shadow Realm? It's a Black Gen Z mindset. Make sure you go ahead and like, comment, share, subscribe. And let's get into the video. All right, guys. So we have a very special topic for you today. Oh, man. We are going to be talking. Well, let me start off by saying this is the part 2 to my 54-part series, Evil African Kings. And the first series or the first episode we did was on Idi Amin. We did have some technical issues with YouTube, but if I encounter any technical issues with YouTube, I'm just going to go to Rumble, and then from Rumble, the stream will go to Patreon. So guys, this stream will not be up long. This stream is going to go directly to Patreon. So make sure you sub to the Patreon, and my mods throw the Patreon link down there. Guys, I'm doing my best to, stay consistent with this type of content. And I think it's very, very important because we're starting to see some crazy things. I know a lot of y'all are looking at what's going on in France. As a matter of fact, we might take a hop to Twitter land and see what's really going on in France, man. I mean, it's not good. So many different things that I want to show you guys. And I mean, honestly, I don't know if I should show it because YouTube might trip, but I mean, it's not anything too crazy. Let's see. Let me just show you some of the videos that I've been seeing. So as you guys, can see, France has been taken over by mass immigration, from the Middle East and African countries that are, still undergoing civil war. And that's why I'm doing this series, because, you still have Africa. I mean, it's a mess right now. Not every single country in Africa is a mess, but pretty much I'll say like 90%. But you have a lot of refugees leaving the Middle East, leaving Africa, and they're going to European countries. Some like France, Germany, the UK. We saw things happening in Switzerland as well a while back. This was, 2015, 2016. But now it's hitting France, and it is not looking good. This is a Holocaust memorial that these migrants are tagging up and disrespecting. So let's see. So they were about to burn the flag and then, raise it up. And these women, it looks like these women are trying to stop him. I mean, these women just need to stay out of it. If the French men are not willing to fight for their country, then the women definitely just need to fall back. So you see this, it looks like they're trying to console this brother. Let me give you a bigger zoom, but I don't know. It looks like they're trying to, talk some sense into him or whatever, but I don't think it's working. Oh yeah, Sweden, not Switzerland. My bad, Sweden. So as you can see, man, it is a shit show. And that is at a Holocaust memorial in France. And man, it is not looking good. A lot of people are, tweeting prophetic things. Man, I mean, there's random white people getting beat up in the streets by the migrants. It is not looking good in France. Let's see. It looks like they got some videos of the French defending themselves, or trying to at least. I don't know, man. It looks like they're gonna, unless the military starts coming out. I mean, these are very violent videos that I would show you, but they ain't playing. And they don't have any guns, so there's no. It's not like people getting shot in the streets, right? But they're using sticks, knives. You got pepper sprays. I mean, I'm just trying to illustrate what's going on. So, it is looking rough. It is looking rough in France right now. But anyways, we are going to get back to our feature presentation, and that is evil African kings. But first, we have to start with an evil Belgian king. And this is obviously a European guy, because we're talking about the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or the Free State of Congo, or Zaire, however you want to call it. But we're talking about the Congo, and you can't talk about the Congo without talking about King Leopold II. So that's where we're going to start our journey when it comes to this story, because I think that it sets a precedent for what is going to happen in the future. It actually does give, even though I'm not really big on the epigenetic thing, but it does give it gives a good argument if you want to take that route. And a lot of people would say, okay, the reason why there's still civil unrest is because of, the colonizers coming in and being super violent. Okay. So it kind of bleeds into that argument, but anyways, it's still a very interesting story. We're going to have to take a deep dive into history. Obviously I'm going to increase the playback speed of some of these videos, but man, a lot of fascinating stories. So we're going to start off with King Leopold II, and then we're going to go into Mobutu. So it's going to be fun, guys. Let's get into it.
II ruled over Belgium from 1865 to 1909. Today, the memory of his reign still lives on, and he is glorified with golden statues of his likeness in every major city in Belgium. In history classes, each generation is taught that he was a humanitarian who brought Christianity and the wonders of civilization to the Congo Free State. However, the truth has been kept away from the Belgian people. The reality is that King Leopold II is responsible for the murder and mutilation of 10 million Congolese people. In the video...
Woo! So yeah, and that is a fact. Before King Leopold II came to the Congo, I believe the Congolese population was like 20 million. He pulled up and he just started pretty much, enslaving the people, mass murdering, cutting off hands. I mean, this shit is fucking crazy. So, you could say this is obviously systematic oppression. All right. But it still doesn't negate the fact that from this evil reign, we went right into another evil reign. And I mean, history is very, it's very hard to like point the finger in our modern day and age, right? Because in their time, right, they were great people, but then you look back at it and it's like, okay, this was some fucked up shit. So, history definitely makes you reflect on where we are morally today. And I would argue that we're starting to lose a lot of that morality. And at least the West is pretty much due for a mass casualty event, because I think that we just don't think that it is possible for, us to get touched like that. Obviously, we've had false flag attacks, like, 9/11, all these other stuff. Y'all, we can talk about that on another day. But, all throughout the world now, there's just mass casualty deaths happening. You see in the Ukraine, 300,000 killed. And that's counted bodies in the streets. So, I just feel like we are so protected from that. And that's why, that's what makes America great. And it's also going to be the reason why America falls, because we think it can't happen to us, but we're just so close to being touched in a way where, we're just, it's crazy. And I hate to see it, but it looks like we're going down that path where what's happening in France is going to happen in other European countries. And then it's going to end up happening in the States.
Today, we're looking at what might just be the biggest cover-up in European history.
All right.
35. Leopold II was born in 1835 to King Leopold I and Louise Marie of Orléans. They were the very first royal family of Belgium because the country was just 5 years old. For thousands of years, that territory had been conquered by nearby the Netherlands, France, Germany, and Luxembourg. They were a newly independent country that had yet to form a unique national identity. Leopold II had two younger siblings called Philippe and Charlotte. Their family life was dysfunctional, to say the least. Soon after Charlotte's birth in 1844, King Leopold I met a 16-year-old girl named Arcadie Claret. He was 54 years old at the time, but that didn't stop him from having an affair with a teenage girl.
Okay, so if we really want to keep it a buck, although this relationship could be deemed fucked up in our modern understanding, a lot of young girls were getting pregnant, and the age of consent was not a thing. All right, so we can judge from our perspective, but it was a different time. Anyways,
parents would go on to become a baroness, and her sons, George and Arthur, were made into barons. There were rumors that Leopold I had several other affairs, so the exact number of half-siblings that Leopold II has is actually unknown. Queen Louise Marie was...
Okay, so he was... Leopold I was definitely a Rolling Stone when it came... he wasn't practicing dick discipline, and he was having illegitimate children, but the queen stayed down.
Understandably miserable in her marriage, and she chose to let out her anger on her children. She would make fun of young Leopold II's large nose that he inherited from his father. She told her son that his face was disfigured and that he had the beak of a bird.
So she was cooking his ass because she was in a relationship where she was pretty much getting cheated on all the time, so she took it out on her children. Mother of the Year.
1853, when he was 18 years old, Leopold II had an arranged marriage with Marie Henriette of Austria. Since he had never actually seen what a loving marriage looks like, the teen couple were incredibly awkward around one another. Someone in the Belgian royal court had commented that seeing them together was like watching a nun and a stable boy. People thought that this was so hilariously accurate that the phrase was repeated amongst everyone who knew them. Apparently, his parents cared so little about Leopold that they never even bothered to tell him about the birds and the bees. Leopold's aunt, Queen Victoria of England, had a great marriage with her husband Albert, and she apparently gave her nephew a lot of sex advice. This was probably just as awkward as you are right now imagining.
Yeah, auntie giving sex advice, it's not too off base. As weird as it sounds, my grandma used to, tell me to wrap it up and all types of stuff. Practicing safe sex. But I think, as long as they don't do nothing crazy like Jim Jones' mama did and practice on the kid, then, there's nothing wrong with a conversation with your kid about the birds and the bees.
Leopold II and Marie Henriette eventually figured it out because they managed to have two daughters together. When Leopold I died in 1865, Leopold II ascended to the throne as the new king of Belgium. Since his personal life was so dysfunctional, it's really no surprise that his happiness and satisfaction came from attaining material things. According to William II, the ruler of Germany, he was together watching a parade with Leopold II in Berlin when he commented, there is really nothing left for us kings except money. Before he died, King Leopold II's father made 50 attempts to conquer a colony for Belgium, but he always failed. It was clear to him that the power of other countries like England, France, Germany, and the United States was thanks to colonization.
So, as you guys can see, this passion for colonization and the failure of his forefathers probably inspired Leopold II to, go and look to colonize for Belgium, but what he ended up doing was just colonizing for himself anyways.
Leopold I believed that without colonizing an African nation, they would never be considered one of the world's larger powers. Leopold II picked up where his father left off, but he did not want to conquer a nation on behalf of Belgium. He planned to make an entire country his personal property. This way he could have complete control and have direct access to the profits. He knew that if he was honest about his greedy intentions, none of the other major powers would agree to let him colonize an entire country for himself. So he simply told everyone that it was his mission to spread Christianity to the Congo. He wanted to convert and civilize those poor godless souls.
Okay, so this is how he is. He's which a lot of colonization was masked with bringing religion. So obviously, we look at that now, and you have a lot of naysayers of religion nowadays. I'm not gonna preach to you guys, but you can have your own opinions. But people nowadays and before used and use and continue to use, will use in the future, religion for political, financial, and personal gain.
In 1884, he met with 14 other European nations at the Berlin Conference. He pitched his idea for colonizing the Congo and claimed that he wanted to spend his own fortune bringing missionaries to Africa out of the goodness of his own heart. He also promised the rest of Europe that they could freely explore and trade with his country. The Congo, though, was known for being incredibly dangerous and difficult to colonize. The rainforest and savanna, they're filled with gorillas, lions, leopards, and wolves. The Congo River has man-eating crocodiles and hippopotamuses, as well as insects that carry deadly diseases. In general, it was a very wild place, and not many Europeans exactly wanted to go out there and live. If Leopold II wanted to go and take on the challenge, the other powers were pretty much willing to say, well, go on then. A Welsh explorer and journalist named Henry Morgan Stanley already had years of experience in Africa. He was sent on projects by several different newspapers in the United Kingdom, and he became an expert on the continent. Through his writing, he tried to convince Queen Victoria that despite all of the difficulty, he believed it would be worthwhile to colonize the Congo. His suggestions never made any impact until King Leopold II found his work. In 1879, the king sent him on a mission to colonize the Congo. Henry Morton Stanley used parlor tricks to convince the African tribal chiefs that white men were invincible. He used a battery-powered contraption to make his grip so strong that Congolese men almost collapsed from a single handshake. Stanley claims that white men could rip a tree out of the ground with their bare hands. He also held a magnifying glass in the sunlight and used the sun's rays to light his cigar, claiming that white men had power over the sun. Finally,
all right, so obviously this is trickery in order to create a superiority complex to get cheap labor. So let's keep going.
Handed a gun
just grazing over it
to a native man. He instructed him to step back several yards and try to shoot him. Stanley had taken the gunpowder and bullet out beforehand, of course, and when the young man pulled the trigger, Stanley would double over dramatically, only to take his shoe off and shake the bullet out onto the ground. He claimed that white men were spirits who could not be killed no matter how hard they tried, and that a bullet would simply pass right through them.
Damn, and I mean, the fact that them niggas was going for that shit, that kind of whoo! I mean, that kind of, tells the state of where they were at as far as civilization goes. And I mean, obviously you see some motherfuckers that you never seen before, you're going to be curious, but to just immediately believe that, a motherfucker can't get killed is kind of wild. But obviously we're thinking about it in our lens. We're not, using their lens, which obviously they had not really seen white folks like that. So Understandable, but damn, I mean, shit. If you get finessed like that, that's wild.
This was enough to terrify the chiefs into signing a contract which declared King Leopold II the new owner of the Congo. Of course, the Congolese people had no idea what the contract actually said, but it served as a legal document in the eyes of the European people.
All right, so using contract law in order to trick the people. I mean, all these things are, things we learned in history class. Let's keep going.
Now, Leopold wanted to keep up an image that he was doing good in the country, so he named it the Congo Free State. Henry Morton Stanley published a book about his journey through Africa called Through the Dark Continent. He was able to go on a lecture tour around London, and he was even knighted in 1899.
So, this would be an interesting read. Let me see. Be an interesting read to see from Henry Morgan Stanley, his perspective of what the Congo was in that day and age. So, if you guys want to do some summer reading, there you go. I might pick the book up myself and maybe we'll read some of it on stream if they have a PDF and I can find it.
Able to go on a lecture tour around London, and he was even knighted in 1899. Leopold II truly was paying for all of the startup expenses to colonize the Congo out of his own pocket. He appointed governor generals to manage the various territories of the country. Leopold's men eventually discovered that the rainforest had a plentiful supply of rubber trees. It was essentially like stumbling across a gold mine. At the time, there was a huge demand for natural rubber in order to make tires, but there was a very small supply. The only problem, of course, was finding a way to pay for all of the manual labor required. Leopold II, he ordered his men to enslave the Congolese people. Each of the governor generals had their own tactic to achieve this. Usually they set a village on fire so that there was nowhere for anyone to hide. They would shoot and capture women of the village and tell the men that if they did not bring back 15 kilograms of rubber by the end of the day, they would kill their wives and daughters. The Congo Free State was anything but free.
Damn, so they had to do 15 kilos of rubber a day. Woo! They was moving rubber like they moved cocaine. God damn. So obviously the enslavement was a huge part of where the Congo is today. But looking at some of these documents, I actually have I got the book here. Let me see how many pages it is. So it's a very long book. Goddamn. I think it's like 500 pages. But I'll find something interesting in this book and maybe read a little chapter out of here.
King Leopold II believed that all of these people were his personal slaves and he could do whatever he wanted with them. King Leopold personally handed out bonuses to the commanders if they could produce more rubber by any means necessary. Leopold began to grow his own private army in the Congo called the Force Publique. When his men were destroying villages, they would pick out the tallest and strongest young men to recruit as soldiers. These soldiers were instructed to systematically kill anyone who disobeyed the orders of the governor generals. They were told to not waste any ammunition and that they must kill a man with a single bullet. They were required to bring back one severed hand for every bullet fired. If they did not, they would be killed by their general. This led to the soldiers cutting off hands of people that were still alive whenever they wasted ammunition. Meanwhile,
yeah, damn. So they had a wild ass system to keep their slaves in line. Oh man, I mean that is brutal, and this speaks to the brutality of King Leopold II, which you can say led to the struggle for independence later on, and maybe why some of these African rulers were so brutal. Could it be learned behavior or what they were going to do anyway with power? We don't know, but what we do know is that's definitely some fucked up shit.
While in Europe, people had no idea what was actually going on. Word got around that King Leopold II needed more soldiers to help with his Christian mission to colonize the Congo. Hundreds of young men from Belgium, Italy, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they all signed up to join the Force Publique. They were taught that these black natives were animals and not fully human like them, so they shouldn't feel guilty about killing them whenever necessary. After a while, these men, they became desensitized to the killing. Some of these soldiers would gut people and pull out their entrails or slice off a group of men's genitalia, only to hang them in a row. Some of the governor-generals wrote letters to King Leopold II about these scenes because they were actually proud of their brutality. They believed that the worse they treated the Congolese people, the harder they worked. Over time, King Leopold's men managed to enslave the entire population of the country.
Damn.
Even though it promised that the rest of the world could visit the Congo whenever they wanted, King Leopold II became very nervous when he learned that Arabian merchants were coming to gather some rubber for themselves. He did not want to lose his monopoly over the industry, so he declared that they needed to go to war with these so-called Arab slave traders, which would free the Congolese people. This sparked the 2-year Congo-Arab War. In 1895, an English merchant named Charles Stokes was on a mission for the Germans to travel to the Congo to purchase rubber. He was hung by the Fourth Republic without receiving a trial. Germany and Britain, they were outraged that he was killed without ever committing any crime. Leopold was forced to pay substantial fines to both governments for violating the treaty, and the incident was called the Stokes Affair. However, paying this fine, it was a drop in the bucket. King Leopold II made a profit of 220 million francs, which would be worth more than $1 billion today. Leopold II hired a team of propaganda writers to publish books and articles about what a great job he was doing. None of these writers had ever actually traveled to the Congo Free State, but they were happy to glorify their king's Christian mission. However, journalists from Great Britain and the United States were beginning to travel to the Congo Free State and report on what they saw. In the year 1890, an American Civil War veteran named George Washington Williams visited the Congo Free State, and he was horrified. He wrote an open letter to King Leopold II recounting the horror.
I can't tell if this is a white guy or a black guy, or a mixed guy. I can't fucking tell. I guess he's supposed to be darker skin. I don't know, but this is the guy who went to the Congo and saw the atrocities and started really making noise on the international stage. So shout out to bro.
And he was horrified. He wrote
George Washington Williams, I believe.
An open letter to King Leopold II recounting the horrors that he witnessed while visiting the country. The king never replied. A man named Edmund Dene Morrell worked as a clerk at a
Damn, he left that nigga on red.
shipping firm in Liverpool, England. Belgian ships would come and go, delivering rubber to Liverpool from the Congo. Morrell knew that it wouldn't be possible for Belgium to produce such a high volume of rubber unless they were using slave labor. He began investigating, and when he discovered the horrors about what was actually happening, he wrote several anonymous articles for a British newspaper called The Speaker, exposing the truth about what he saw. He wrote that this was the greatest crime that has ever been committed in the history of the world.
All right, so this is a white guy, Edmund Dene Morrell, and he is saying that the colonization of the Congo by King Leopold II and his enslavement of the Congolese people is the greatest crime that has ever been committed in the history of the world. And I mean, shit, the nigga killed King Leopold II killed 10 million people. Shit, I mean, I can't argue against that, honestly. So definitely some wild shit was going on, and this isn't really that long ago, which is crazy, only a couple hundred years ago, and this could have been your ass or my ass or anybody, right? So
in 1901, the shipping company offered Morrell a job to manage the shipments of rubber to and from the Congo. They were willing to pay him a huge salary in exchange for his silence. He turned it down and became a full-time journalist instead. He became so passionate about the cause that he began publishing his own newspaper called the West African Mail with any new information that he found. In 1906, he published a book called Red Rubber.
Wow, and all these books I highly recommend. Okay, I'm actually going to read a passage from the Henry Morton Stanley book. So we'll probably get to that after we finish this one up.
A journalist named Roger Casement was sent to interview people of the Congo to get their testimonies about the human rights abuses in the country. He realized that it was crucial to convince the white Christian missionaries to come forward with their stories because they had been there from the beginning and they could prove that King Leopold II was aware of the atrocities. After Roger Casement's report was published, King Leopold II, he knew that if he did not respond with his own inquiry, this would be the end of him. He sent his own international commission to the Congo in the hopes that he could bribe them. He thought that he could pay them off to publish whatever he wanted them to say. But this totally backfired. A Christian missionary named John Harris had been living in the Congo Free State for years. He and his wife devoted their lives to helping the Congolese people. When King Leopold's international commission showed up, John Harris was ready for them. He gathered a group of Congolese people who testified to the death, torture, mutilation, rape, and enslavement that they suffered at the hands of the king. His wife, Alice Harris, was a photographer, and she was able to present them with photographic evidence of the horrors they had seen. When the international commission...
malnourishment are obviously mutilating hands and feet, just grotesque things. I mean, shit, you could say this shit probably worse than the Holocaust, honestly, as far as like bodies go. More bodies was dropped. Yeah, I mean, let's keep it a buck. But, you know, a lot of people just are not aware of that. So let's keep going.
Returned to Belgium. They published a 50-page report on all the human rights abuses that they had found in the Congo. They submitted it to King Leopold II. Once he realized that he could no longer get away with his lies, Leopold ordered all of the Congo Free State records to be burned so that there would be no evidence of his crimes. In 1908, the Congo became a Belgian colony, but they didn't seize it from the king. Instead, they paid him 50 million francs for the purchase.
Damn.
He died just 1 year later in 1909.
Damn. So he obviously on record owned the Congo, and he sold that bitch off to Belgium, and then he died a year later. I mean, man, I mean, he got away with the shit. Shit is crazy.
Once the Belgian government visited the Congo, they found far more profitable resources than just rubber. There were diamonds, gold, and ivory that could be sold for massive profits. The government ended slavery and employed the Congolese people to work for wages instead. Very soon after, Belgium became extremely wealthy. The city of Brussels now has some of the most breathtaking architecture in the world, complete with golden statues of King Leopold II, all because of the money that he brought from the Congo. But the Belgian government, they had to make a decision. What do they tell the public? Leopold II had lied to his people for a long time, and they looked up to him like a father figure who brought glory to the country. Not only would the citizens be disappointed, but it would make Belgium look terrible to the outside world. Their nation was still less than 100 years old at the time. England and the United States had already outlawed slavery in the 1800s, so the King of Belgium had essentially taken a big step backwards in humanitarian progress. The Belgian government chose to allow their people to continue believing the lie that King Leopold II had built for himself. They taught their children that there was never any slavery in the Congo Free State and that everything King Leopold II did was wonderful. This lie was retold generation after generation to the point...
So, you know, this just lends to the mass marketing and manipulation of the minds, which the covering up history and whatnot. All these are valid arguments. You just have to have the correct examples of such when making that argument, and it has to be applicable to whatever, I guess, region or area that you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people will talk about Belgium and how great of a country, and I mean, shit, they pretty much did what a lot of other countries did back in the day, which is, you know, exploit the resources of these undiscovered or undeveloped regions like Africa and South America, Central America, whatnot. So, I mean, it's very interesting stuff.
Where it became their new truth and part of their cultural identity. Before his death in 1897, Leopold II created a human zoo at his summer estate. He built a model African village and captured 267 Congolese people to live there. Belgian people showed up to gawk at them, throwing peanuts and bananas over the fence as if they were monkeys.
That's wild.
They were forced to stay outdoors in this village in all kinds of weather. Several of those people died of influenza and pneumonia. After he died, the king's estate became the Royal Museum of Central Africa, and it continued to glorify Leopold II's achievements in colonization. Decades after his death in 1958, the government of Belgium even went as far as to replicate his human zoo at the Brussels World Fair, putting Congolese people on display like animals once again. Nearly every Western nation has some history of slavery and genocide, but in most Belgian school classes, they will never hear the truth about King Leopold II. They will say that slavery never happened in the Congo. Since the records were destroyed, we will never know just how many people Leopold was responsible for killing. Some estimate that it is roughly 4 million, while others believe it is as high as 10. Somewhere between 70 to 90% of the total population was wiped out. In the age of the internet, it has become much more difficult for Belgium to ignore the reality of what happened. In 2018, the curators of the Royal Museum of Central Africa finally decided to change the exhibits to honor the lives lost by the native Congolese people. However, Congolese people who visited the exhibit said that it is still not enough, and that as long as the story is told from the perspective of a Belgian white person, the country will never show the full truth about the monstrous deeds of King Leopold II. So in some way, the internet has become an incredible way.
All right. So, very interesting there. Gives you kind of a background. Now I have, I got like 30 more minutes on, King Leopold II, which, I got some really good ones from Disturbing History. So we might go into that one. And then, but I did want to read the passage from Through the Dark Continent by Henry Morton Stanley. This is just what I found off rip. This is page 140, and it's dated February 22nd, 1875. Wow, man. I mean, just imagine being alive in 1875. It's hard to imagine, right? But anyways, it says, my poor bull terrier, Jack, while chasing a mongoose into one of these hedges, quite lost the use of one eye. Our next camp was Myra, 15 miles north by East Mag. From Mondo and 4,800 feet above the sea, we were still in view of the beautiful rolling plain, with its rock-crested hills and herds of cattle and snug villages, but the people, though Wasakuma, were the noisiest and most impudent of any we had yet met. One of the chiefs insisted on opening the door of the tent while I was resting after the long march. I heard the tent boys remonstrate with him, but did not interfere until the chief forcibly opened the door. When the bulldogs, Bull and Jack, who were also enjoying a well-earned repose, sprang at him suddenly and pinned his hands, the terror of the chief was indescribable. As he appeared to believe that the white man in the tent had been transformed into two ferocious dogs, so little was he prepared for such a reception. I quickly released him from his position and won his gratitude and aid in restoring the mob of natives to a more moderate temper. A march of 17 miles north by west across a waterless jungle brought us on the 24th to South Uzma. Native travelers in this country possess native bells of globular form, with which, when setting out on a journey, they ring most alarming through not in harmonious sounds to waken the women to their daily duties. The journey to Howa in North Usma was begun by plunging through a small forest at the base of some rocky hills, which had been distinctly visible from Myra, 31 miles south. A number of monkeys lined their summits, gazing contemptuously at the long string of bipeds condemned to bear loads. We then descended into a broad and populous basin wherein villages with their milkweed hedges appeared to be only so many verdant ciclets, great fragments, and heaps of riven granite, gneiss, and trap rock. were still seen cresting the hills in irregular forms. Through a similar scene, we traveled to Gembachika in North Usma, which is at an altitude of 4,600 feet above the sea and 14 miles from Hulwa. As we approached the settlement, we caught a glimpse to the far north of the mountains Irirwi and to the northeast of the Manasa heights, which we were informed by the natives form the shores of the Great Lake. On the morning of the 27th February, we rose up early and braced ourselves for the long march of 19 miles, which terminated at 4 p.m. at the village of Kahei. The people were as keenly alive to the importance of this day's march and as fully sensitive to what this final journey to Kegewi promised their wearied frames as we Europeans, they as well as ourselves, look forward to many weeks of rest from our labors and to an abundance of good food. So I guess this is a picture of or depiction of what the people look like. Very interesting here. You guys can go get that book on your own time, but let's get back into some of the atrocities done by King Leopold, and then we'll move on to Mobutu.
Of all the European colonies in Africa, there is one that holds a very dark place in history. The Congo Free State only existed between 1885 and 1908. During these 23 years, it was the personal property of King Leopold II of Belgium. Whilst most colonies were owned and run by various countries, King Leopold held personal dominion over the lives of over 30 million people. Under Leopold's rule, these people suffered horrific mutilations as the king attempted to extract as much wealth as he could at the expense of countless lives. We will today shed a little light on the Congo Free State and explain how it was maybe the worst example of European colonialism in Africa. Belgium is a relatively new country, recognized in 1839. By this time, the major European powers of Britain, France, and the Netherlands had already established themselves as colonial powers, whilst Germany and the United States of America were on the rise. The first king of Belgium, Leopold I, attempted successfully to obtain a colony for the young nation, believing it would be the best way to keep up with its neighbours. However, the general public view in Belgium was against obtaining a colony. His son Leopold II carried on his father's goal, but with particularly devious means. In 1876,
let's speed this up a little bit.
Leopold established the International African Association, a charitable organization with aims to, quote, civilize the largely unexplored Congo and to carry out religious missions to the region. But this was merely a cover for its colonial desires. Leopold realized that no other European nation was too interested in the Congo, despite the potential wealth in ivory identified by some explorers. Leopold approached the famous explorer Henry Morton Stanley. Henry was asked to prepare the Congo for Belgian occupation.
Yeah, and a reason why a lot of different colonies weren't interested in Congo because it was just, they thought it was just like vast rainforest and unusable land and whatnot. But I mean, obviously we now know that it being the heart of Africa, it's rich in natural resources, not only rubber, but obviously diamonds, gold, precious sediments and whatnot. And I mean, this Henry Morton Stanley guy, obviously he explored it and he basically drew up the blueprint of how, King Leopold II was going to be able to take over this vast and rich land.
He had previously visited the Congo and had tried to petition the British government to lay their own claim, though the British were not too interested. Dejected.
Yeah, and shout out to Mr. E. He mentioned the vibranium. Yes, it's another reason why. I mean, there are so many different things. There are so many different resources that Africa, has, and this is the reason why these European countries went over to colonize them, because I mean, it was a way for these colonies to enrich, or these countries to enrich themselves. So let's keep going.
Stanley accepted Leopold's offer of employment. Around the same time, the explorer Pierre de Brazza was working on behalf of the French government to claim the land. The race was on to establish Leopold's interest in the Congo. A number of Belgian trading stations were created along the Congo River, as well as a number of fortified military posts. Stanley entered many treaties with various tribal chiefs in the Congo Basin, but these treaties were not understood by those who signed them and gave legal rights over the land to Leopold. More often than not, Stanley would employ trickery to convince the chiefs of the white man's power, including using a magnifying glass to light a cigar, declaring that if he so wished, he could harness the sun to burn down any of their villages. Between similar ploys to show the supposed supernatural powers of the white man and getting the chiefs to sign on gin, Stanley was able to obtain 500 land treaties. The goal of obtaining these treaties was to obtain legal ownership to the vast swathes of the Congo, at least in the eyes of the other European states. Despite this growth along the Congo River, Leopold insisted to his European neighbours that his intentions with the Congo was purely humanitarian, in particular, to rid the area of the various Arab Zanzibar slave traders operating in the region. He positioned himself as a friend to all, with the offer to no special treatment to any nation's access for trade. But, behind the scenes, he played each of the major powers against one another, gaining support for his ambitions from Germany and indifference from Britain. As a result, Leopold placed himself in a strong position in what is known as the Scramble for Africa. It was in November of 1884 that the infamous Berlin Conference took place. 14 of the major European powers and the United States of America met up to set the rules as to trade in the African continent, and roughly decide which countries would have a claim on the vast swathes of Africa. Not a single representative from any African nation was invited. Arbitrary boundaries were drawn up, as if with a ruler at times. There was no regard for the various cultures who would be impacted.
Oh, shout out to a Katie. I'm tripping that he said vibranium isn't real. Yeah, that's the Wakanda shit. I was talking about what's that shit called? The shit that you use for nuclear weapons. What's that shit called? Damn. Let me see. Hold up.
In this scramble for Africa, the European powers laid their claim to the wealth of the continent and the lives of the African populations. But the key aim of the conference was as to the fate of the key trade routes and the Congo River and the Niger River. It was decided that these were to remain accessible to all for trade. Leopold accepted this, but was able to have his claim on most of the Congo officially recognized.
Yeah, uranium. Yeah, my bad, guys. Yeah, shout out to the uranium.
Almost 1 million square miles, which contained around 30 million people. The Congo Free State was formed from this land in 1885, effectively under Leopold's direct control. To enforce his will, Leopold established the Force Publique, his own private army in the Congo. Many of the soldiers were African children captured at an early age and raised in the Catholic missions, brainwashed to become obedient soldiers. The force was supplemented with mercenaries from Zanzibar and handpicked from the Congolese men who were the fittest and strongest. These soldiers were forced to serve a minimum of 7 years. There were no black officers, with most of them being from Belgium and Northern Europe. The officers were young and inexperienced, but they were eager to engage in what they saw as an adventure. Many lacked any understanding of the native populations or the men they commanded. Originally, the force was used to deal with the Arab slave traders in the area, but in time, even the slave soldiers were forced into its ranks.
All right, so we get the point with King Leopold II. So now we're gonna move on to Mobutu, and this story is partly the fight for independence, post-colonialism and whatnot. So it's gonna involve some different power plays, which some of the things you could understand and be like, okay, you're in war, you have to fight off enemies. Yeah, we get that part. So, and then some things you're just gonna be appalled by.
What image comes to your mind when you think of an African dictator? You're probably thinking of a military strongman using nationalist rhetoric, decrying imperialism one moment while taking bribes from Western corporations the next. a man who ruthlessly silences critics and treats his political rivals with unspeakable brutality. They are corruption incarnate, putting the most flamboyant of celebrities to shame with their gaudy ostentatiousness. The man you are probably thinking of is Joseph Desiré Mobutu, or as he is known later in life, Mobutu Sese Seko, Kuku Nbendu Wazabanga, which translates as the all-powerful warrior who, because of his endurance and inflexible will to win, goes from conquest to conquest, leaving
It's a long-ass name.
fire in his wake. Mobutu ruled one of the most resource-rich countries in the world, and through mind-boggling levels of corruption, squandered it, leaving his country to decades of economic backwardness and civil war after his death.
Right. So, I mean, there were some things that Mobutu did that you could deem good as far as pushing infrastructure and whatnot in the Congo, but he ended up falling short. And I mean, just like that same practice of stealing the wealth from the nation and pawning it off to these European countries, you know, when he's supposed to be an anti-colonialist. I mean, it's wild.
This is the continuing story of the post-colonial Congo started in this previous video, but it's also part of Project Dictator, a massive collaboration of history YouTubers all making videos about dictators from all over the world at all different times. You can find the playlist for Project Dictator down in the description below or at the end screen. But for now, let's get on with the show.
How much control does Mobutu have over the wealth of Zaire? How much personal control?
Cooperation between the United States and Zaire under President Mobutu's leadership stretches.
So when you hear Zaire, Mobutu basically changed the country's name from the the Free State of Congo to Zaire. So he did that because he basically wanted the country to have an African name, and that's what he came up with.
For 20 years and 5 United States administrations. In that time, American leaders have learned to place a particularly high value on President Mobutu's insights and counsel.
His goal has been, and I think to a considerable extent he has succeeded, to become the tribal chief of the whole country. It all belongs to him. It all belongs to him effectively.
You see, I wouldn't say how much control he has, because he is, in this respect, Mobutu is Zaire. He controls it all.
Mobutu was born in Lasala in 1930 to a family of the Nabandi ethnic group in the northern Congo. His mother, Marie Madeleine Yemo, was a hotel maid who had escaped from the harem of the local tribal chief.
Damn.
She would marry Alberic Gamani, who was employed as a cook for the household of a Belgian judge. The judge's wife took a liking to young Mobutu and taught him how to speak, read, and write in French. Unfortunately, Mobutu's father died in 1938, which left the family in a financially precarious place. Mobutu would be taken in by his uncle and grandfather until he was sent to a Catholic mission boarding school. He excelled at both athletics and academics, but he had a reputation as a troublemaker. One day, he stowed away on a boat for a trip the priests were taking to the colonial capital of Leopoldville. And when he was caught, he was punished with conscription into the force publique. This punishment may sound harsh, but let's consider the historical context here. Had some Congolese man who was not from the boarding school been found on this ship, the punishment would have been far worse. Regardless of the relative laxity of this punishment, it would create a distaste for the Catholic Church for the rest of Mobutu's life. Beginning at the age of 19, Mobutu would serve in the force publique for 7 years, gaining him his military experience that consisted mostly of border patrols and suppressing Congolese protests. Luckily for him, it was more of the former. His time in the army turned him into a voracious reader, needing to fill the endless hours of checkpoint duty. He was a frequent reader of the European newspapers discarded by the white Belgian officers. He was also a fan of the writings of Charles de Gaulle, Winston Churchill, and Machiavelli. It was at this time he also began dabbling in journalism, writing in favor of political independence for the Congo, but under a pseudonym. He quit the army in 1956 and became a journalist, but he was...
So, just this to point out, unlike Idi Amin, he had the education, he had the intelligence, but he had that ingrained hate for pretty much white Catholics for throwing him into that the boarding school there when he got caught on the boat, the stowaway. So, you know, it's not like he was just like, you know, mentally incompetent, but he also allowed, you know, that African mysticism and that magic to affect his cognitive abilities as well. And I mean, it starts to get bad, but let's keep going.
Was quickly drawn into political activism in 1958 after he met future Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. Following that meeting, he joined the MNC and eventually became the personal assistant of Lumumba, joining him at the negotiations in Belgium that led to the Congo's independence in 1960. He would be promoted to the Army's Chief of Staff position during the Congo crisis, often being sent in to negotiate with insurrectionary Congolese soldiers. He would take power twice during the crisis. His first bite at power came in the fall of 1960 during a constitutional crisis between President Joseph Kasavubu and Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. He had both men placed under house arrest while he attempted to resolve the constitutional issues. Lumumba escaped from house arrest in order to join up with a rebel government operating in Stanleyville, but he was recaptured by men under Mobutu's control. He then ordered his men to hand Lumumba over to the rebels in Katanga and South Kasai, who executed him for the massacres Lumumba's forces had orchestrated. After his death, Lumumba was able to release Kasavubu from house arrest and restore him to the presidency. He would have to resolve a similar conflict again in 1965, in a crisis between Kasavubu and...
So that Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba thing is really important because that kind of establishes his reign as the king of Zaire, basically. And it gets cult-like when it comes to some of these African kings here, because they start having the people worship them and whatnot. I mean, it gets really weird. But let's see. What I'm gonna do, we're gonna talk about Patrice Lumumba later on in the stream, and we'll continue this one, and then the next. Let's see, which one is the one where we talk about Lumumba? I think it's the next one that we're gonna talk about Lumumba.
New Prime Minister Moise Tshombe. The president dismissed Moise Tshombe as prime minister, despite his party controlling the parliament, who refused to approve the president's preferred candidate. Mobutu orchestrated another coup to end this deadlock, placing the country under military rule once again. Kasavubu was placed under house arrest, and Moise Tshombe was charged with treason. To avoid trial and execution, he fled the country and went into exile in Spain, still under the rule of Francisco Franco. Kasavubu was eventually allowed to leave house arrest and retire to his family estate, dying in a hospital at the age of 54 in 1969. After his 1965 coup, Mobutu addressed a crowded stadium in Leopoldville. He declared that since 5 years of rule by politicians had ruined the country, it would take him at least 5 years of sole rule to right the country's course. In reality, he would go on to have nearly absolute rule over the Congo for the next 32 years. The parliament would pass legislation turning over most of its own powers to the president and his cabinet. And in March 1966, Mobutu used these powers to permanently suspend the parliament, assuming all of its remaining functions. He began rounding up opponents and potential rivals and having them executed in public. In May 1966, 4 members...
So that's obviously some wild shit. I mean, and like I said, I understand the power struggles, but I definitely get it, right? You know, a lot of these the Africans, they're definitely relentless, and when it comes to a power vacuum, you're gonna have a lot of snakes who are gonna be trying to cross you and go behind your back and do deals that you don't approve of and try and snake you from position, just like he snaked Lumumba. So you're eternally paranoid, and internally paranoid for that matter, based off of the actions that you had to take in order to seize power. So I definitely get that dynamic, but yeah, I mean, he's doing the public executions to set an example.
Of his cabinet were accused of treason and hanged in front of a live audience of 50,000 people in the capital, sending a very clear message to all who would dare challenge him.
They wanted to form an opposition party, which constitution, by the way, is illegal in Zaire.
Afterwards, Congressman Leland happened to be watching from the hotel entrance as the opposition deputies left. The deputies were set upon by plainclothes police.
One guy had been thrown to the ground, as I said, by his tie, and there's several people just kicking him and stomping him while he was bleeding profusely from his forehead. I just saw blood going everywhere. Had I interfered, I probably would have been killed.
Around this time, rumors began to spread that the exiled Moise Tshombe was plotting his own coup to overthrow Mobutu. In anticipation of this, some of the army officers, along with foreign mercenaries still in the country that had worked for Tshombe, mutinied in Stanleyville in July 1966, killing the local commander. However, the mutiny was crushed. Fearing the rumors of coups and already having accused him of treason, Mobutu had Moise Tshombe tried in absentia, where he was sentenced to death in 1967. On June 30th, Moise Tshombe was on a flight between the Spanish islands of Ibiza and Palma when a French intelligence agent, Francis Baudoin, hijacked the airplane. France and its president, Charles de Gaulle, were supporters of Mobutu, and to aid their relations, decided to aid Mobutu in capturing Tshombe. The plane landed in Algeria, whose government was under the pressure from France and Mobutu to return Tshombe to the Congo, while other Western governments, including some activists in the US, were urging Tshombe to be returned to his exile in Spain. The Algerians ignored both and held Tshombe under house arrest until his death in 1969. There are conspiracy theories around Moise Tshombe's death, most of which allege that Mobutu had him killed while in exile via poisoning. Unfortunately, my pay grade is not great enough to evaluate these conspiracy theories. Regardless of whether Tshombe had really been plotting a coup or the circumstances of his death, his capture by supporters of Mobutu would trigger another mutiny among his supporters. Led by a Belgian settler, Jean Schramm, along with 1,100 other soldiers from Katanga, revolted in Bukavu in the eastern Congo, where they held out against a 32,000-man force in the ANC for 4 months, until November 5th, when Schramm and his remaining fighters escaped across the border into Rwanda, where they surrendered to local authorities. Mobutu demanded the Rwandan government extradite the foreign mercenaries fighting amongst the rebels back to the Congo, but they refused. Mobutu responded to this by cutting diplomatic ties in January 1968, restoring them only a year later after the mercenaries had left Rwanda. Some of the rebel leaders would escape to Portuguese Angola and place themselves in the service of the Portuguese colonial forces, fighting against the various Angolan independence movements. In 1967, Mobutu founded his own political party, the Popular Movement of the Revolution, and subsequently banned all other political parties. The party's ideology was outlined in the Manifesto of Nassau. It consisted of what the party called authenticity and Mobutuism. The party theorist Kangafu Kutumbagana
Mobutuism is crazy.
described authenticity as a metaphysical and abstract concept, not a dogma or a religion, but a manner of action. It leads away from borrowed ideas and aspirations towards an increased consciousness of indigenous cultural values. Mobutism was defined as a Congolese nationalism which rejected tribalism and regionalism. It also advocated an abstract concept of revolution. Authenticity was a program for eliminating the remnants of colonial culture and economic influence. The former of these positions resulted in a wave of name changes across the country, replacing the colonial-era names with ones that sounded more African, such as the capital of Leopoldville, named for King Leopold II, being renamed Kinshasa, and more prominently, the name of the country itself. This would be the second name change the country went through since gaining independence. When it declared independence in 1960, it did so as the Republic of the Congo. But during the course of the Congo crisis, a neighboring French colony also declared independence as the Republic of the Congo. In 1965, the new constitution renamed the country the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But in 1971, Mobutu renamed the country again, calling it Zaire. The purpose of this was to make the country look, feel, and sound more authentically African. But the funny thing is that the name Zaire is just as much of a colonial relic as the name Congo. The name Congo came from a Belgian mispronunciation of the name Kikongo, while the name Zaire came from a Portuguese mispronunciation of the word Nazadi. Mobutu's regime would also ban Congolese from having European names. This came around the time.
So this nigga didn't even get the name right. It's crazy.
He changed his name from Joseph Desiree Mobutu to Sese Seko.
My name is Lefoli Mumulasu. I used to be called Emmanuel, but in order to be more authentically Africans, we changed our names here in Zaire.
Catholic priests were threatened with imprisonment if they baptized any Congolese person with a European name. This was seen by the Catholic Church as an attack on Christianity, since most of these European names were derived from Christian saints. These policies are similar to cultural programs of the Black Power movement in the US, which encouraged African Americans to abandon their white names and adopt ones that were more authentically African. And similar to Mobutu's decision to rename his country Zaire.
And that movement, it still lives on to this day. That's why we have all these, crazy names and people, people naming their kids Wakandalisha and shit like that. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Those names picked by members of the movement had little to no connection to authentic African names, and in some cases were built on Western stereotypes of African names. The authenticity campaign didn't end at nomenclature. It continued into fashion. After a trip to China, Mobutu had Western forms of dress banned and replaced them with Mao-style tunics with African-inspired patterns. This is when Mobutu stopped wearing his military uniform and began wearing what we now associate with an eccentric African dictator. And it involved a lot of leopard print. Mobutu didn't just target cultural change, but economic change as well. The MPR's economic position, as self-described, was the repudiation of both capitalism and communism. A common slogan at the time was neither left nor right, and later they expanded it to neither left nor right nor even center. They seem to be dabbling in third-way political language, which historically originated as a description for fascism, but most people using these types of descriptions are unaware of the historical connotations. Regardless of whether or not they were aware, they would end up having a very similar economic policy to those of fascist states. But do you want to know what has nothing in common with a fascist state? The Casual Historian Patreon. Boom, segue! Before we move on.
Okay, so he plugging his Patreon. I'm dead. Okay, anyways.
Now, most of what you'll hear about the Congo's economy under Mobutu is bad, and that'll be the case here. But there were people who genuinely benefited from Mobutu's rule.
In 1967, Badolite was a tiny village of mud huts. Just a few years after taking power, Mobutu transformed the place into a modern town.
So, I mean, he did implement some infrastructural projects. So that's, you know, that's a work in progress, right? So a lot of people, you know, kind of give me backlash on the evil African kings thing because they have a personal connection to some of these kings and were brought up and taught that these guys were, you know, the bee's knees, and really they were just indoctrinated. And I'm going to show you clips of how Mobutu actually indoctrinated his people into believing that he was their savior and that he was, you know, impenetrable, and he was like the great leader. And he basically had it so that the whole country worshipped him, and anybody who said anything against him, you know, would suffer dire consequences.
With banks, a post office, and even a hydroelectric plant.
Oh, shit.
An extraordinary feat in this province cut off from the world.
In 1967, all the trade unions were nationalized and consolidated as the National Union of Zairian Workers, which guaranteed union membership to all workers, but the government controlled everything. Independent trade unions would remain illegal until 1991. After a downturn in the economy, the Mobutu regime began nationalizing foreign-owned businesses. Some of these businesses were kept under government control, and others were given to Mobutu's supporters, his family, members of the Nabandi ethnic group, and important players in his regime. This was an important part of Mobutu retaining power. Corruption was an essential part of the regime.
Mobutu has also run into the ground many once prosperous businesses that had been owned by foreigners, but which he nationalized and then turned over to family and friends.
So what did we see in Uganda with Idi Amin? He did the same thing. He took businesses that were flourishing due to foreigners who, you know, were running those businesses, whether it be Belgians or East Asians, Indians, whatnot. He took those businesses away from them and nationalized it, so gave control to the state and then divvied it up to his friends and family who had no idea how to run those specific businesses. And I mean, that's just the same story that we hear in Uganda. So these guys are definitely not learning from history and making the same mistakes.
Mobutu and his insiders enriched themselves from the public coffers. They could run prosperous businesses into the ground and then receive subsidies from the treasury, which they would then pocket. They bought up mansions across Europe, especially in Belgium, where they would stash their ill-gotten wealth and would spend large parts of the year living away from Zaire.
And that's crazy that they would go back to the... See, and that's the whole myth of colonization, or maybe it's the indoctrination from the white man that you could say, but the fact that they were colonized by Belgium and then, I mean, you know, years later, they're going back and spending most of their time in Belgium, well, colonized by King Leopold II and then taken over by Belgium, right? But I mean, it's just kind of crazy that, you know, they have this animosity toward Belgium, but then they're laying up in Belgium.
Times away from their responsibilities back in the Congo. Despite posing himself as an arch African nationalist, Mobutu had very European tastes. He frequently chartered high-powered jets and yachts to make trips to Paris, where he would buy thousands of dollars worth of French goods. Mobutu also managed to accumulate a large stock of cash in Swiss banks.
And the US government estimates his personal fortune at $5 billion, making him one of the richest men in the world.
And that was in 1984 dollars. Adjusted for inflation, that would be over $13 billion in 2022.
Damn.
The fiscal mismanagement.
So this nigga was a billionaire and dropped the bag. Multi-billionaire dropped the bag. Fuck.
Management was so bad that roads and infrastructure lay in ruins, all the while Mobutu was spending a fortune on cars he would never drive on them. It was so bad that it was not uncommon for soldiers or civil servants to go months without getting paid. A joke in Mobutu Zaire was, the civil servants pretend to work, while the state pretended to pay them. Bad fiscal policy was exacerbated.
I mean, so maybe he doesn't have, you know, good people who were employed by the government, right? You know, maybe these civil servants were lazy and weren't doing their job. So he's like, hey, fuck it, I'm not going to pay them. Or it could be that because he didn't pay them, they didn't do their job.
By bad monetary policy. which caused rapid inflation, which encouraged even more corruption than there already was.
The staff steal things, either for their own use or to resell elsewhere, and after a few months, there's nothing left.
These policies ended up driving away foreign investors, which made the regime more dependent on foreign aid money from the US, Europe, and the IMF, who were frequently angry at the regime for its human rights abuses. Mobutu did what he could to silence the critics of his regime. He made numerous threats to cut off diplomatic relations with Belgium when its government refused to censor anti-Mobutu publications. He also tried to keep foreign journalists from entering the country and uncovering his corruption and failures.
A Secret Service officer told us that it is forbidden to take pictures in the slum known as La Cité. Forbidden to film the AIDS crisis now taking root there. We were ordered to leave.
Damn, them niggas got an AIDS crisis too, bro. The man just fumbled the whole country, bro. And, you know, implemented that kleptocratic policy and enriched himself and his family, but left the whole country barren. So, I mean, if that is what we're deeming as a great leader, just because the nigga enriched himself with the country's resources, then, you know, we need to really start looking at, we need to start looking inwardly, man, because this should be unacceptable.
Leave and put on a plane for Geneva.
Everything that is said, that is written in the press, is done to destabilize us, to run us down.
Mobutu Zaire had a complicated relationship with the capitalist and communist worlds. Due to the Soviet Union's involvement in the Congo crisis, supporting the Lumumbas and the Simbas, Mobutu had a fervent distrust for the Soviet Union. Moscow would be the only foreign capital he didn't visit during his 30-year tenure. He initially had cold relations with Mao and China in the late 1960s for the same reason. When the UN General Assembly voted to replace Taiwan with mainland China on the Security Council, Zaire was the only African country that voted against it. His relation with China began to change because China's relationship with the Soviets changed, in part thanks to the efforts of US President Richard Nixon. This created the awkward situation of both communist China and capitalist America supporting African nationalists. It was less ideology than it was geopolitics. This is especially revealed when Mobutu began to use increasingly anti-Western and anti-American rhetoric after his trip to China. But so long as he was stemming the tide of Soviet influence in Africa, the State Department was willing to put up with his rhetorical anti-Americanism. He visited Beijing in 1973 and met with Chairman Mao, and he seemed to fall in love with Communist China and its campaign against foreign influences.
Yeah, so, I mean, cozying up with Mao is it's not a good look. You know, when you look back at it historically, obviously, you guys can look at Mao Zedong and all the bullshit he was up to. But, I mean, he's another guy who had his people worship him and, pledge their loyalty to him, the state, which he personified as himself. I mean, a lot of... oh man, a lot of wild shit was going on, and it's crazy that we're even where we are today, with all the happenings of the world and of history. And like somebody said in the chat earlier, you know, think about all the shit that, you know, wasn't recorded, that wasn't written down, that happened. Yeah, I mean, that's insane.
This is why when he returned to Zaire, he banned Western dress and encouraged people to wear the style of tunic popularized by Mao. It also helped that China promised Zaire $100 million in technical aid, so Mobutu wouldn't be faced with the same constraints as the US or IMF usually attach to loans and foreign aid. The two countries would attempt to stem Soviet influence in Africa after Angola gained independence from Portugal in 1974. Multiple groups have been fighting against the Portuguese throughout the War of Independence. The two biggest were the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola and the National Liberation Front of Angola. The PMLA had been supported by and was in turn pro-Soviet, while the NLFA had been supported by and generally favored the West. China and Zaire began funneling resources to the NLFA as the War of Independence devolved into a civil war. The PMLA government in Angola would return to gesture in 1977. Remember those Katengan exiles who revolted against Mobutu in 1966 and 67? While in exile in Angola, they formed the National Liberation Front for the Congo, with the primary goal of ousting Mobutu from power. But for most of their history up to this point, they had been supporting the Portuguese against the PMLA and NLFA. But once the Portuguese were gone, they needed a new patron, and the MPLA were willing to use them against Mobutu. Under the leadership of Nathaniel Mabumba, they invaded the former state of Katanga, now called Shaba. Mobutu asked for international assistance and received it from France, who dropped 1,500 Moroccan paratroopers into the Congo to help repel the Angolan-backed invasion. The NLFC attempted another invasion in 1978. This time, they were aided by both Belgium and France, who provided air support, along with the US, who provided logistics. After the invasion was repelled, neighboring Togo sent peacekeeping forces to Zaire to help dissuade further incursions from Angola. Mobutu also had rivals on the continent to contend with, in particular, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Both were trying to position themselves as the leader of post-colonial Africa. They supported opposite sides in Chad's civil war. Mobutu feared that Gaddafi would use Chad as a staging ground to destabilize the Central African Republic, which could then lead to the destabilizing of his own country. There were a pair of terrorist attacks in Kinshasa in 1984, one hitting a newspaper, Voice of Zaire, and one hitting a post office. Gaddafi, who by this point had a history of supporting international terrorism, was blamed for the attack. A year later, Gaddafi gave a speech actively encouraging the overthrow of Mobutu. Mobutu had mostly warm relations with the US, with occasional cold spells when Zairization policies were being implemented. He accused the CIA of plotting a coup to overthrow him, for which he had numerous generals and government officials arrested as alleged conspirators. The Carter administration distanced itself rhetorically from Mobutu due to human rights concerns, but half of the foreign aid given to sub-Saharan Africa still went to Zaire. They also gave material and logistical support to Zaire during the Shaba invasions of the late 1970s. In 1980, the House of Representatives tried to terminate military aid to Zaire, but the Senate and President Carter reinstated the funds. Mobutu had warmer personal relations with Reagan and Bush 41, though policy remained largely unchanged until the fall of the Soviet Union. After that, the US and other Western backers began pressuring Zaire to reform and democratize. The ultimate fall of Mobutu was an international affair rather than a domestic one. Mobutu and his cronies had run the economy into the ground. They made the country an unsafe space for foreign investment, with the regime alternating back and forth between nationalizing foreign property and returning it. What little solvency the government had was due to foreign aid. But since the Iron Curtain fell, the only reason the West had to prop up Mobutu was gone. I am the latest victim of the Cold War, no longer needed by the US. The lesson is that my support for American policy counts for nothing. Due to losing the support from the West, Mobutu decided to give up his monopoly on power in 1990, allowing political parties other than the MPR to stand for elections, and installed a transitional government. However, he retained substantial power for himself. October 1991 saw a riot of unpaid soldiers in Kinshasa, which forced Mobutu to bring in opposition figures into a coalition government. But he retained control of military and security forces. Factionalism within the government resulted in two separate governments forming in 1993. The anti-Mobutu government being led by Laurent Monswego, the two would reconcile in 1994 to create a transitional government.
So obviously the women are crying because they don't know why the fuck they getting ousted. They think their man is just this, that, and the third, and he over here running the country to hell.
Same year, Mobutu's son, Niwa Mobutu, whom he had been grooming to be his successor, died from AIDS.
Damn, this nigga. This nigga's son died from AIDS. That's how you know how bad the AIDS epidemic was in the Congo. That basically the fucking king's son dies from AIDS. I mean, that's insane. That nigga was sticking his dick in anything, boy.
Factionalism within the government resulted in two separate governments forming in 1993. The anti-Mobutu government being led by Laurent Monswego, the two would reconcile in 1994 to create a transitional government. That same year, Mobutu's son, Niwa Mobutu, whom he had been grooming to be his successor, died from AIDS, which not only devastated the dictator emotionally, but also drastically weakened his position, leaving him with no obvious successor. The true death nail for Mobutu would
he should have hit up Magic Johnson.
Come out of a neighboring country's civil war. Mobutu had strong ties with Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, who came to power in 1973. He supported his regime in its civil war with the Rwandan Patriotic Front. This civil war fell along ethnic lines, with Hutus supporting Habyarimana and the Tutsi siding with the RPF. Civil war and genocide in Rwanda resulted in...
So as you can see, these, same thing that's happening in Uganda, these different ethnic groups fighting for political power. Both of them hate each other and pretty much want to wipe each other out, honestly.
The Tutsi victory, which motivated hundreds of thousands of Hutu refugees to flee across the border into Zaire. Mobutu allowed them to set up military bases in eastern Zaire, from which they could launch attacks into Rwanda, as well as allowing them to attack Tutsis within Zaire. The Rwandan government began arming Tutsi rebels in Zaire. This conflict would begin to destabilize the continent as a whole. Mobutu's government ordered Tutsis to leave Zaire on penalty of death. The Tutsis, organized as the Banyamulenga, were the focal point of a rebellion. They were aided by and functionally led by President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and his defense minister, Paul Kagame. They launched an offensive to overthrow Mobutu, joining forces with rebel leader Laurent Desire Kabila. Burundi and Angola also supported the growing rebellion, which would grow into the First Congo War. Mobutu was in Switzerland at the time for cancer treatment, and thus couldn't coordinate resistance. The only thing holding the rebels back was the grossly neglected infrastructure. After peace talks failed in May 1997, Mobutu fled into exile in Togo, while Kabila took the capital and proclaimed victory. On May 23rd, the country's name was changed back to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mobutu would be kicked out of the Congo by President Ayademe, after which he fled to Morocco, where he spent his remaining months until his death on September 7th, 1997. He was buried in Rabat. In December 2007, the National Assembly of the DRC recommended his remains be returned to the DRC, but this has not yet taken place. I want to give a quick thank you to my page.
All right, so shout out to the casual historian with a very good and brief breakdown. I want to show some of these clips from the, I guess they were, it was like ceremonies that he used to host, and where the people were basically forced to praise this nigga. It's kind of weird. Some cult-like shit. Let me see if I can find the clip. Anyways, we'll get into this next. Let's see. This one's 44. This one's 20. All right. We'll get into this Patrice Lumumba documentary because this one is interesting. And it kind of shows the power struggle between Lumumba and Mobutu. But I'm gonna get into this how Mobutu conquered the Congo documentary real quick from New Africa. It's pretty dope.
From Uganda's Idi Amin proclaiming himself Lord of all beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, to the lesser-known Jean Bedel Bokassa, who spent the equivalent of 1/4 of his government's annual budget crowning himself emperor of an invisible Central African empire. The stereotypical image of the African dictator has been one of an arrogant and cruel simpleton who manages to hold on to power through nothing more than brute force and populist rhetoric. But in the words of the renowned Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the problem with stereotypes is not necessarily that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete.
So, I mean, even this sister said that stereotypes were not untrue. And I mean, we all have come to understand that, but I mean, these African kings that we're supposed to reference and exalt in high esteem, they weren't good emperors, they weren't good rulers, they weren't good, reasonable, loving kings who, you know, wanted to see their country prosper. They were, you know, tyrants who the people, you know, initially loved, right, because they got their independence, but then they ended up learning to hate. It's crazy.
African dictators. There is probably no single greater illustration of the nuances and complexities that underpin dictatorships in Africa than Joseph Désiré Mobutu's 31-year stint as leader of the country known today as the Democratic Republic of Congo. A self-proclaimed anti-communist who modeled his entire state apparatus after China's Chairman Mao. A self-professing African revolutionary who collaborated with his country's former colonizers to depose his own prime minister. And a self-declared Afrocentric whose love for European luxuries and prestige would see him appropriate an estimated 1/3 of his country's GDP and build a personal net worth nearly twice the size of his country's national debt.
Woo! So his personal net worth was more than the whole country's national debt, twice the size. Absolutely insane. And his overthrowing of Patrice Lumumba was him coordinating with colonial Belgium in order to do so, because Belgium basically felt that Lumumba, if I'm not mistaken, was a Soviet sympathizer. So they wanted him out of there and they thought that they could control Mobutu. But they were sadly mistaken. So, I mean, it's insane.
A paradoxical man from a nation of paradox. Mobutu may have been stereotypically arrogant and cruel, but he was far from a simpleton. His over 3 decades as Congo's supreme leader would be built on a complex combination of evil genius, willpower, and good fortune. But to truly understand Mobutu, you need to understand Congo. And to understand Congo, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning. Born in 1930 to a poor family in what was then known as the Belgian Congo, Mobutu grew up in a country which prior to becoming a Belgian colony had been the personal property of the infamous Belgian King Leopold II, a devious monarch whose lust for wealth and power would see him appropriate a territory 80 times larger than his own kingdom and oversee the killing of over 10 million Africans within a period of just 2 decades.
Woo!
Responding to the international outcry following the discovery of King Leopold.
Yeah, so I mean, he killed 10 million Africans over 23 years. That's almost 500,000, 500,000 Africans a year. I mean, that motherfucker, he was just pouring, spilling blood like crazy. It's insane.
Atrocities. The Belgian government took charge of the territory in the year 1908. Through the promotion of the French language, the building of Catholic primary schools and seminaries, and most importantly, the transfer of all political power to the Belgian colonial administration. The Belgian government worked to create a society in which Belgian settlers would control Congo's vast mineral resources on behalf of the native population, who the Belgians expected to be submissive, cooperative, and reverent. The perfect colonial subject in Belgian eyes was a kind of African colloquially referred to as an évolué. This was essentially an African who, through formal education, Catholic teaching, and obedience to colonial laws, had grown to not just accept Belgian rule, but was perhaps even grateful for it.
Yeah, and this, people would describe this as a Uncle Tom in our day and age.
An évolué was an African with a good enough command of the French language to be useful but not threatening to the colonial administration. An African who tried his best to imitate the mannerisms and outward appearances of the Belgian settlers he saw around him. An African who, for all intents and purposes, had come to see Belgian culture as superior to his own. On his own personal journey to becoming a well-rounded évolué, a young Joseph Mobutu was studying at a Catholic boarding school in 1949 when his youthful mischief and boisterous sense of humor landed him in trouble with the priests at the school. As punishment for sneaking out and stowing away on a boat to meet a young girl, he was ordered to serve 7 years in the colonial army. And while he may have despised it at the time, Mobutu's 7 years in the colonial army would be perhaps the single most decisive period in the shaping of his destiny. During his time in the army, Mobutu received basic military training and developed a strong passion for reading and writing. Among some of his favorites were the writings of Francis Charles de Gaulle and the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. But by far the strongest influence on the young Mobutu were the writings of the Italian Renaissance philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli. So strong was Machiavelli's influence on Mobutu that in the later years, one of Mobutu's military advisors would claim that Mobutu knew by heart most of the words to Machiavelli's seminal work, The Prince. Mobutu left the Belgian army a fully fledged évolué, and thanks to his strong command of the French language, he soon became one of only a handful of native Congolese journalists in the country. But the coming of age in the 1940s and 50s of the first generation of Congolese who, like Mobutu, had received enough formal education to hold white-collar jobs in the colony would quickly begin to expose the flaws in the fundamental assumptions underpinning the Belgian colonial enterprise. You see, the Belgians assumed that the provision of primary schools, Western medicine, and consumer products would be enough to guarantee the emergence of a generation of natives who, unlike their ancestors, would be content with Belgian rule for the rest of their lives. But to their shock and horror, there was a glitch in the programming. Rather than simply be grateful for the so-called benefits of Belgian civilization, many within Congo's first generation of formally educated natives began to denounce the colonial system as hypocritical at best and deeply exploitative at worst. Under Belgian rule, natives had virtually no political voice and had no right to own land or travel around the country as they pleased. Natives were also subjected to curfews in urban areas and forced labor in rural areas. Although they could attend primary schools, the only other form of further education available to most natives was either in Catholic seminaries or the colonial army. Only in the year 1950, nearly half a century into the colonial era, were native Congolese permitted to attend the same secondary schools as the children of Belgian settlers. While natives were encouraged to train as clerks, traders, miners, and mechanics, they could not become doctors, lawyers, or architects. In sharp contrast to British colonial policy, which generally relied on a level of joint enterprise between natives and the colonial administration, The Belgian approach was aimed at ensuring complete dependence on Belgian manpower and expertise. Virtually all posts in the civil service and judiciary were held by Belgians, and natives were not allowed to receive full military training or become commissioned officers in the colonial army. But despite Belgium's best efforts to keep its precious possession, the famous winds of change of the 1950s.
Shout out to Jay Lou. He dropped some facts. He says the Congo River is the world's deepest river. It's almost unbelievably scary AF, over 700 feet deep in places with all types of catfish and the Goliath tiger fish. Look that bitch up. Okay, check it out.
And 60s would ultimately deal a fatal blow to the house of cards that was the Belgian Congo. In March 1957, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah successfully secured the independence of his home country from Great Britain. As the first black African leader to achieve independence, Nkrumah immediately embarked on an aggressive campaign to inspire young Africans from all over the continent. Nkrumah's message would resonate particularly strongly in Congo, where a multitude of political movements and parties would spring up in different parts of the country. Although most of these movements were divided along tribal lines and disagreed on fundamental issues such as whether Congo should be broken up along ethnic lines after independence, or even whether independence should be immediate or gradual, the one thing they all agreed on was that the Belgian colonial enterprise needed to be brought to an end. One of Kwame Nkrumah's most passionate Congolese disciples was Patrice Emery Lumumba, a passionate orator whose revolutionary zeal would see him become the most prominent leader in Congo's independence movement. Just like his hero Nkrumah, Lumumba was neither interested in a gradual transition into full independence nor a post-independence division of the country along ethnic lines. Shortly after attending Nkrumah's 1958 All-African People's Conference, his righteous indignation against Belgian imperialism became irrepressible. And despite facing strong opposition from some of his peers, Lumumba embarked on a campaign calling for the immediate and complete liberation of the Belgian Congo. But for all his revolutionary zeal, Lumumba would prove himself rather naive about the harsh realities of power politics and even the viability of the country he was fighting so hard to liberate.
So, I mean, he's basically saying that he ended up becoming the fool and, you know, going against, you know, the colonizers, but his own people were plotting against him as well. It's crazy.
Very much unlike Nkrumah's Ghana, which had relatively high rates of formal education, a functioning native army, an experienced civil service, and a relatively homogeneous population, Lumumba's Congo was a very large and diverse nation with very low levels of formal education, and virtually all of the colony's entire civil service and judiciary was composed of Belgian nationals. To say that Congo was less prepared than Ghana for life as an independent Western-style democracy would be a bit of an understatement. As of the year 1960, Congo had a sum total of 30 university graduates, and the largest single group of formally trained native professionals, whereas less than 700 Catholic priests. Only 136 Congolese children graduated secondary school at the end of the 1960 academic year, and the country had no indigenous doctors, secondary school teachers, or senior army officers. But by far Congo's greatest disadvantage was the deep disunity among its various tribes and ethnicities, who for over 70 years had been united against their will by the strong and brutal arm of Belgian imperialism. And so very much unlike in countries like Ghana, Botswana, or Tanzania, there was no single independence movement or political party that had majority support from all or even most regions in the country. To complicate matters even more, Congo's rich mineral resources had made it a major geopolitical battleground in the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. In the eyes of the Americans, an independent Congo, led by the left-leaning Patrice Lumumba, was diametrically opposed to American interests, as they would open up the possibility of Congo's vast uranium, copper, and gold deposits falling into the hands of the Soviets.
Yeah, so as you guys can see, the West didn't want the Soviets to get a hold of the uranium, not vibranium, in the Congo.
But while Lumumba's revolutionary fervor kept his head in the clouds, one man who had his feet firmly on the ground was the young Joseph Désiré Mobutu. Sensing that Congo's independence was virtually inevitable, Mobutu joined Lumumba's party, Le Mouvement National Congolais, which was popularly known as the MNC. Despite his many years working as a part-time paid informant for the colonial police, Mobutu rebranded himself as a passionate Congolese nationalist, and within a short while, he struck up a close friendship with Lumumba and even became his personal assistant. In his new position, Mobutu began working alongside Lumumba as he petitioned the Belgian government for his country's independence.
So as you can see, Mobutu kind of snaked his way into Lumumba's what we would consider a chief of staff, if you will.
The negotiations for Congo's independence were not cordial. Lumumba and his associates gave the Belgian government a 30-day ultimatum to either organize elections and grant Congo's independence or risk an outbreak of violence. Scared by the prospect of a full-blown Algerian-style war of independence, the Belgians were forced to hastily concede to Lumumba's demands. Shaken and embarrassed by how quickly they had lost control of their precious colony, the Belgians would now turn their energies towards ensuring an independence in name-only outcome, in which one of the more moderate pro-Belgium Congolese parties would win the elections and enable the Belgians to continue running the country as they did prior to independence. But despite their best efforts, moderate parties did very badly at the elections, and in fact, no single party was able to win a majority in the country's new parliament. However, following some rather swift and rocky negotiations, Congo eventually achieved its independence on the 30th of June 1960 after a shaky coalition of 12 different parties agreed to a power-sharing arrangement. Congo began life as an independent state with the 35-year-old Patrice Lumumba as its first prime minister and Lumumba's arch-rival Joseph Kasavubu appointed as non-executive president. But like a young deer thrust into a den of hungry lions, Lumumba's Congo would be ripped apart before it could even find its feet.
Violence and chaos in the Congo. Barely 11 days after official independence from Belgium, Congolese troops mutiny and began a wave of attacks and looting throughout the far-flung sectors of the former colony. Meanwhile, in Belgium and in African countries bordering on the Congo, refugees are pouring in with harrowing tales of violence and of hasty flight.
So you can see when Congo was granted their independence, all the white Belgians, obviously considered refugees now, had to flee 100 miles per hour because the Congolese, were killing them and kidnapping them and whatnot, and just taking out their anger on the Belgian citizens, which, if you look at the history, is understandable, but at the same time not justifiable, because you're basically blaming people who had nothing to do with this shit on, these individuals who had nothing to do with this shit. You're blaming some shit that, one man did or several men did, right, on people who had nothing to do with it. So very much like we saw in Uganda, where Idi Amin was pushing out the East Asians, he didn't do it as violently as what was happening in the Congo, but I'm sure, it was some casualties.
At least 10 Europeans were reported killed in a weekend of violence, with armed clashes in the key cities of Elizabethville, Stanleyville, and Louisburg, which was to be the new nation's capital. At the request of Congolese officials, Belgian paratroops were recalled to quell the native army's mutiny and reign of terror, a harsh awakening to reality from golden dreams of independence.
Within its first 7 days as an independent state, an army revolt would break out into a fully fledged civilian massacre as Lumumba's government struggled to control the situation.
Damn.
Sensing blood, opposition parties immediately began questioning the legitimacy of Lumumba's government, and a number of secessionist groups began threatening to rip the country apart.
So they basically, civil unrest happens. Lumumba puts the riots or civil unrest down violently, which results in a massacre, and now the people are turning against him.
You see, Lumumba's MNC had actually only won 33 of the total 137 seats in the new Congolese parliament. Although this was the largest single total of any other political party, nearly half of all of the MNC's votes came from just one province in Stanleyville, and it had very limited support in the capital and other major regions. With the outbreak of chaos, Lumumba's rivals in the resource-rich Katanga and South Kasai regions spotted an opportunity to grab power for themselves and immediately began trying to secede from the newly independent Congo. Also looking to protect their own interests, Belgian operatives began collaborating with the Katangese rebels as they saw Katanga as a base from which they could eventually topple Lumumba's government and establish a pro-Belgium unified Congolese government in the country's capital of Leopoldville. By the end of its second week as an independent state, Congo was in a critical condition. Internal security had completely collapsed, the army was in disarray, the white minority of Belgian civil servants, doctors, and teachers began fleeing to Belgium, and the rebels of Katanga and South Kasai continued threatening to break the country apart. In desperation, Lumumba dismissed all Belgian officers in the army and appointed his former personal aide Joseph Mobutu as Army Chief of Staff. Although Mobutu had only received basic military training during his 7 years in the colonial army, his ability to gain Lumumba's trust had just earned him his first major victory on the road to absolute power. As the crisis got from bad to worse, Lumumba publicly accused the Belgians of being at the heart of the crisis and appealed to the United Nations for help. Dissatisfied with the UN's response, Lumumba hastily turned to the Soviet Union for military assistance in his desperate attempt to restore internal order. And unfortunately for him, this move would ultimately prove to be his undoing. You see, Lumumba had long been on the CIA's watch list as a suspected communist sympathizer, and with his appointment as Congo's prime minister, Washington had been on high alert against the threat of increased Soviet influence in the Congo. And so with his appeal to the Soviet Union, the Americans felt that the suspicions about Lumumba had now been confirmed. Lumumba's actions would bring both Belgian and US interests into perfect alignment, and having agreed on the need to get rid of Lumumba, the only remaining question was about how to go about it. The perfect man for the job would be none other than Lumumba's newly appointed Army Chief of Staff. Where most people saw chaos, Mobutu saw a golden opportunity. The Congolese crisis would be for him the perfect way to fast-track his long-term political ambitions. By aligning himself to American and Belgian interests, Mobutu realized that he could use their military might to consolidate power for himself and create a perfectly symbiotic relationship between him and two of the world's most powerful countries. And so while Lumumba continued to accuse the Belgians of sabotage and desperately tried to rally up nationalist spirit, Mobutu publicly accused Lumumba of being a communist sympathizer and blamed him for the disorder in the Congolese army.
So obviously, Mobutu turns on Lumumba.
Acting in collaboration with President Kasavubu, the Belgians, and the Americans, Mobutu would go on to arrange for the capture and secret execution of the very same man that had brought him to the corridors of power.
That's crazy. So he basically stabbing his brother in the back. Obviously, to these niggas, Black lives don't matter. It's all about a power struggle.
A new chapter begins in the dark and tragic history of the Congo with the return to Leopoldville of deposed Premier Lumumba, following his capture by crack commandos of strongman Colonel Mobutu. Taken to Mobutu's headquarters past a jeering, threatening crowd, Lumumba was impassive at this lowest ebb of his stormy career. Mobutu watched as his troops manhandled Lumumba, but promised the pro-red Lumumba a fair trial on charges of inciting the army to rebellion.
So they promised him a fair trial, and you're going to see what happens to this guy.
Lumumba was removed to an army prison outside the capital as his supporters in Stanleyville seized control of Oriental.
They're literally tying this nigga up with a rope. That shit is fucked up.
Province and threatened a return of disorder. Before that, Lumumba suffered more indignities, including being forced to eat a speech, which he restated his claim to be the Congo's rightful premier. Even in bonds, Lumumba remains a dangerous prisoner, storm center of savage loyalties and equally savage opposition.
With Lumumba out of the picture, Mobutu turned his focus to forcefully crushing the Katangese and South Kasai rebellions, as well as a separate Lumumba-inspired rebellion that arose in Stanleyville shortly after his death. And after over 4 years of heavy fighting, Mobutu's US-backed forces successfully quelled all rebellions and restored power to the central government in Leopoldville. As a show of gratitude for his services to the nation, President Kasavubu promoted Mobutu to the rank of Major General, which in the year 1965 was the highest rank for an officer in the Congolese army. But by this point, Mobutu's deep connections and access to US and Belgian firepower had basically made him more powerful than both his president and his prime minister. Just 6 days after his appointment as Major General, Mobutu finally formalized his status as the most powerful man in Congo when he dismissed both the president and prime minister in a relatively straightforward military coup. Immediately moving to instill fear in the hearts of the public, Mobutu ordered the hanging of 4 of Kasavubu's former ministers in front of a crowd of over 50,000 spectators.
Damn, so, I mean, I would say that's pretty uncalled for. These guys basically made you commander of the military, and then you cross them out, X them out like that. It's fucked up.
With this bold and brutal spectacle, Mobutu sent a clear message to all his potential rivals.
Dans nos démocraties, nous ne pendons pas les politiciens, nous n'exécutons pas les politiciens.
Je vous répète encore ici, mon cher.
So he's saying in our democracies, we don't hang politicians or execute them. That's the Western way. And watch his response.
Politiciens, nous n'exécutons pas les politiciens.
He says, Mobutu says, let me remind you again, my dear friend, we are not Europeans or Westerners.
Je vous répète encore ici, mon cher ami, nous ne sommes pas des Européens, nous ne sommes pas des Occidentaux, nous sommes plutôt nous autres des Bantous.
We are Bantus. Okay, so he's giving the we are a warrior tribe argument. All right.
Et puis, ne croyez pas parce que nous avons été colonisés par les Occidentaux que nous sommes devenus par.
And he says, and we don't think that just because we were colonized by, or he says, don't think just because we were colonized by Westerners.
Ne croyez pas parce que nous avons été colonisés par les Occidentaux que nous sommes devenus par là.
That we have now become Westerners. We are still Bantus. So he's like, shit, we niggas, bruh. And you know, if we see somebody who don't fuck with us, we kill them. We don't allow dissent. We don't allow talk back. We punish them and we put down opposition. That's what he's saying, because we're Bantus.
Les Occidentaux, nous restons Bantous et nous avons nos mœurs.
Says we have our own morals, which are not like yours and never will be. So he's saying they have their own ethics and their own moral code. And what's right to the white man is not what's right to the ethnic African. And what's wrong to the white man is not what's wrong to the ethnic African. So rape and murder may be wrong to the white man, but to the ethnic African, it is not, because we are Bantu, and wherever we go, we conquer and we benefit from the spoils of war. And that is pretty much a testament to his political leanings and the way that he ruled in his power. You know, he took whatever he wanted from the people, from the country, enriched himself, and didn't care. I mean, he slept like a baby. He never thought that anything that he did was wrong. He just felt it was the Bantu way. This is why I keep telling you guys, there is no remorse or no, when it comes to these super gremlins on Demon Time, there is no remorse, because what is culturally acceptable, you know, in the community and even in these African countries, you know, murder is culturally acceptable. All right. All these different things that we may deem as horrible things, to them are culturally acceptable and normal.
C'est-à-dire que la démocratie,
He says, so democracy, as we understand it, is not applicable here in your view.
nous l'entendons, n'est pas applicable tel quel ici, à votre avis.
He says we can apply it, you know, speaking of democracy, in reference to democracy, but not to the letter like in the West. So he's like, yeah, you know, we apply, we're conditionally democratic. When it benefits us, we're democratic. Like when we need Western funds, then yes, we're a democracy. But in our country, it's still a dictatorship. I guess he's trying to classify his rule as a democratic dictatorship. I mean, those two are in direct contradiction with themselves, but hey, that's basically what he's saying.
On peut l'appliquer, mais pas à la lettre, comme chez vous.
Quelle est la nuance exacte?
They said, so what exactly is the nuance then?
La nuance, c'est que
He says the nuance is that for us over here, the respect given to a chief is sacred.
chez nous, le respect dû à un chef, par exemple, c'est quelque chose de sacré. On ne peut pas jouer ou
You can't mess about with a chief.
avec un chef. Lorsqu'un chef décide, il
When a chief makes a decision, his decision is final. That's that.
décide, un point, c'est tout. J'ai décidé au nom du haut commandement que nous sommes
I decided in the name of the high command that we will be in power for 5 years.
au pouvoir pour 5 ans. Et un point, c'est tout. Il n'a pas de...
And that's that. So he's saying, shit, if I want to rule the Congo until the end of my days, then that's what I'm going to do.
Il n'est plus un groupe de politiciens d'aller se mettre du côté de
Like many of the world's greatest dictators, Mobutu understood that fear alone would not be enough to keep him in power. As part of Congo's 1966 Independence Day celebrations, Mobutu organized a massive memorial ceremony in honor of the deceased Patrice Lumumba.
Even though he killed him or had him killed. And here's the cult-like shit that goes on.
Standing on the grave of the man he had collaborated with foreign governments to assassinate, Mobutu recasted himself as a passionate African revolutionary and anti-imperialist. And from that day onwards, Mobutu's government would go on to execute one of the most comprehensive propaganda campaigns in modern African history. According to Mobutu, his decision to seize power from democratically elected politicians was not a power grab, but a selfless revolutionary act to rid the Congo of self-serving politicians. His violent repression of cessationist politicians was not an assault on their right to self-determination, but a noble peacemaking effort to restore unity to Congo and protect it from foreign powers which were hell-bent on dividing the great nation.
That sister is not having it. She like, you got me up here with these white folks. Look at her. Look at her face. She is not having it.
Hell-bent on dividing the great nation.
Look at her face. She cannot stand these white folks. Oh my God, this is hilarious. She is not having it, dog. She is pissed.
To his credit, Mobutu's masterful blend of hard and soft power initially yielded some very impressive results. Within the first 5 years of his regime, Mobutu managed to bring virtually all major regions in the deeply divided country into full submission to his government. On the economic front, Mobutu stabilized the country's currency, reduced the government's debts, and nationalized the country's lucrative copper mining industry.
All right, so these are some good things that he did, okay? So we definitely want to acknowledge that. It looked like he was almost on the right track.
By the year 1970, Mobutu's Congo was seen as a genuinely viable state with the potential to become the single most important regional influence in Central Africa. Despite initially keeping their ties to Mobutu a secret back in the 60s, the US and other Western powers even began to publicly express their support and admiration for Mobutu. According to US President Richard Nixon, Mobutu was a leader of stability and vision.
So even, you know, from the US lens, he was stated as a leader of stability and vision. So he had US backing, he had Western backing. So he had everything that he needed. I mean, here's the crazy thing. Like I said in the last stream, I could take 20,000 niggas to an African country right now and take that bitch over. Okay? So, I mean, imagine, but the only thing is you probably won't get the following from the African people unless you're ethnically from that region. Imagine if you are the leader of a vastly rich in natural resources, a country that's rich in natural resources, and I mean, it's just abundant with this. Imagine you have the backing of the United States and you fumble the bag. That is, I mean, right now, my nigga, shit. I mean, the sky's the limit. He could have built Wakanda, bruh. He could have built Wakanda. And he fumbled the bag. Nigga saying, bruh, I'm dead.
And in an official meeting...
It was a joke, guys. It was a joke taking 20,000 niggas to Africa and taking over. But I'm just saying, like, I mean, it's really not that far-fetched because when you look at what's been going on in the multiple stories that we've been discussing, it's really honestly a numbers game, and yes, political influence, but it's really a brutality and numbers game. What are you willing to do to take power, and what are you willing to do to keep it? And that's obviously the game that they were playing.
Between the two men in 1970, President Nixon will be quoted as saying, "Though you are a young man and you come from a young nation, there are things that we can learn from you." Mobutu's Congo was suddenly seen as an exciting destination for foreign investors, and encouraged by the US, Mobutu's government passed a number of laws which encouraged an influx of foreign investors and expatriates. Domestically, Mobutu's popularity hit an all-time high during the early 1970s as the soaring price of copper provided his government with a huge cash injection.
So obviously natural resources like copper, and he was able to leverage that to increase the wealth of his nation state, and he fumbles the bag.
With his newfound wealth, Mobutu launched a long list of grandiose development projects. From a steel mill near Leopoldville to a giant dam on the Congo River and a long-distance power line from Inga to Katanga. Despite his ties to the US and supposedly anti-communist stance, Mobutu would draw deep inspiration from China's Chairman Mao and more or less modeled his entire state structure after Mao's China.
And this is where he went wrong. I don't know why he... And this, I mean... Modeling your regime after Mao, I guess he was looking at how he probably was trying to leverage the fear that Mao had instilled into his people for his own personal gain, which is what he did. But I mean, the nigga he had all the opportunity in the world and straight fumbled the bag. And this was his idol.
Marketing himself as a white...
Look, instead of looking up to a white man, instead of looking up to a Belgian man, he's looking up to the Chinese man. But how about you stand on your own? Like, why is he your idol? Why is he your... but obviously we know why, because he's a tyrant and he wanted to figure out how he had his people on lock like that.
As a benevolent father figure, Mobutu's stated grand vision was for the rapid industrial...
Like, how do you get your own people to agree to kill their own children? It looks like he admired that
of his country through his brand of state-controlled capitalism. Mobutu also turned Congo into a one-party state led by his own party, Le Mouvement Populaire de la Révolution, which was popularly known as the MPR. A one-party state was, according to Mobutu, the only way to ensure unity in such a diverse country. And in pursuit of this objective, MPR membership was made compulsory for all citizens, including their ancestors and even their unborn children. Drawing even more inspiration from Chairman Mao, Mobutu started his very own cultural revolution with the rollout of a state ideology which he called authenticité.
Yeah, now this shit is finna be crazy. This authenticity. This shit is like, this is the cult shit that I'm talking about. That voodoo mysticism bullshit that he blends into his politics in order to subjugate his people. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Taking full advantage of the deep resentment of the Congolese people towards Belgian imperialism, Mobutu claimed that the ultimate goal of his new ideology was to re-Africanize the Congolese people through a complete rejection of European cultural norms and traditions.
So he's basically saying all that, all the European shit, like, nice suits and slacks and dress shirts and all that kind of stuff. No, we're going to original African garb. And I mean, we basically going back to the mud, we basically going back from cities and roads and manufacturing, because that is, the origin of the white man. We're going back to mud huts and fucking, I mean, it's a psychologically, it's a brilliant idea to kind of, like he said, leverage the hatred for colonialists in the Belgians and the white man, and leverage that in order to get your people to be more small-minded, respectfully, with all due respect, right? Like, get them to go back to walking around damn near half naked. Get them to go back to, barely knowing how to make a fire for yourselves, and stop all the economic progress that he created by limiting the mindset of his people. It's, this is like some 48 laws of power shit. But it obviously backfired on him and his legacy and the Congolese people.
As part of his great African revolution, Mobutu changed the country's name to Zaire, and cities with European names like Leopoldville, Elizabethville, and Stanleyville were renamed Kinshasa, Lumumbashi, and Kisangani. The Congo River was also renamed Zaire, the country's currency was renamed Zaire, and the national anthem became known as the Zairoise. European names were completely banned for all Zairean citizens, and it became a criminal offense for any priest to baptize a child with a European name.
So obviously working to rid European culture from the Congo?
Leading by
Zaire?
Example, Mobutu even changed his own name from Joseph Desiré Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko Kukungbendu Wazabanga, which in his native tongue meant the warrior who knows no defeat because of his endurance and inflexible will, and is all-powerful, leaving fire in his wake as he goes from conquest to conquest. From superstitious beliefs about the magical powers of his famous wooden cane.
There goes that superstition. The magical powers of his famous wooden cane is crazy.
To elaborate songs and dances celebrating his divinity and omniscience, Mobutu will build one of the most remarkable cults of personality in modern history. Zaire's state-controlled daily news broadcast would always begin with a short clip showing Mobutu in his iconic leopard skin hat descending through the clouds with hypnotic party jingles playing in the background. Places where Mobutu had worked and lived were designated as national pilgrimage sites, and MPR party conferences became nothing more than religious ceremonies in honor of Mobutu.
So these religious ceremonies in honor of Mobutu, I'm going to use normal playback speed so that you guys can understand what's being said. But this shit is weird as fuck. This is like some Nazi Germany shit. But I mean, it's this is what these niggas was on. Just the self-indulgence and narcissism, if you will, right? And we're gonna use the term correctly. But I mean, this guy, he thought he was greater than God, greater than life, and greater than his people, which is the biggest mistake that you can make as a leader, not identifying with the plight of your people. So a lot of people be talking about, oh, we need to go back to singing these old African songs and old African hymns. A lot of these old African hymns were just worshiping whoever was king during that time, which is idolatry. If you are a, believer of Christ. But anyways. So eternal life we sing for Mobutu. Okay. For Mobutu redress Zaire. And also his party, the NPR. I mean, imagine singing a hymn exalting and glorifying a political party. I mean, we can't fathom that in the States. Like, imagine, long live the Republican Party. Like, what the fuck? I mean, even if you're a Republican, even if you're a conservative, you're still not going to fucking, get on your knees and pray to the Republican Party. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Nous chanterons et danserons. Nous chanterons et danserons. L'authenticité est notre politique. Nous voulons être nous-mêmes et non ce que.
Okay, my bad. I missed these. Okay. I gotta read what this one said. Okay. This nigga sound like designer. I got bras in Atlanta. Push a Godin in the Phantom. Legacy. Phantom. NPR equals to serve. Wow. Pledging your servitude to a political party is crazy. To serve oneself? No. Not to serve yourself. We will sing and dance, honor and guide and express our love for him. We will sing and dance. Repeat. Authenticité is our political philosophy. I mean, this is disgusting. This is a cult. It's a fucking cult. This worse than damn Skull and Bones, right? This shit is crazy. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think it's worse. I mean, it's a different level. We want to be ourselves and not what others want us to be. The Republic of Zaire, peace, justice, and work. Zaire is great. Zaire is majesty. So they're saying that Mobutu is well, that shit. Hold on, sorry. Symbol of work. And he just sat there and wasn't enthused at all. I mean, at least if you're gonna have people worship you, at least, I don't know, do a dance or fucking do the gritty or I don't know, do some jumping jacks or something. Let them know that you feeling them. God damn, he just sat there like, that shit was all right. And this nigga leading the sermon is a fucking sheep. This nigga's a damn sheep, bro. This shit's crazy. Mobutu only loves work. Mobutu is the most powerful. Mobutu is the strongest. This is in the 20th century, guys. Shit's crazy. Mobutu is the savior. Mobutu is the restorer. Mobutu is the master builder. Mobutu is the creator. Jesus Christ. And look at all these black men. They like, man, this nigga's full of shit. Look at this nigga's face. Look at this nigga face. He's like, man, this nigga full of shit.
With all the fanfare and mindless adulation he received, Mobutu soon began to believe in his own myth. Taking full advantage of his unbridled power, Mobutu ordered the compulsory seizure of some 2,000 foreign-owned businesses operating in Zaire, which he claimed was part of a drive to Africanize Congo's economy.
Wow, so he took control of 2,000 businesses, or foreign businesses.
Rather than redistribute the wealth of Zaire to the Zairean people like he claimed, virtually all of these foreign-owned businesses were reallocated to Mobutu and his inner circle.
Yep.
Thanks to this and other similar policies, Mobutu would allegedly gain control over an estimated 1/3 of his country's GDP and build a personal net worth of over $5 billion. From an 800-hectare estate in Portugal to office blocks and mansions in Belgium and France, as well as a huge $100 million palace built in his ancestral village of Badolite, Mobutu lived a life that other dictators could only dream of.
Jesus.
Whether it was lavish parties with world dignitaries, or his private farms which were stocked with cows and goats delivered by plane from Switzerland and Venezuela, no desire was too opulent.
This nigga was even importing the cows and goats. This shit is crazy. He was importing cows and goats from white countries. This shit is wild. He talking all this shit about colonialists and, you know, keeping African culture. How about y'all feed on your own animals, right?
Or too bizarre for Mobutu to indulge in. Following the death of his first wife, Marie-Antoinette Mobutu, he married his longtime mistress, Bobby Ladawa, and in typical Mobutu style, took his new wife's twin sister as his new mistress.
Damn! So this nigga was obviously into the polygyny. We was kings and we had wives, nigga.
But while Mobutu may have been a law unto himself in Zaire, the basic laws of economics were no respecter of person or position. Mobutu's seizure of foreign businesses operating in Zaire would prove to be an unabated disaster. Many of the appropriated companies quickly went bankrupt after being run to the ground and stripped of their assets by Mobutu's cronies. Adding fuel to the fire, The great copper boom that had provided Mobutu's government with huge windfalls suddenly came to an end. The cost of food imports rose sharply, the country's foreign debts began to rise exponentially, and the value of Zaire's currency was decimated as Mobutu's government tried to print its way out of trouble.
So he had the opportunity to create a stable dollar within Africa for the country of Zaire that was actually backed by natural resources. And what did he do? He outprinted his natural resources and bankrupted the country. And, you know, he didn't have the Federal Reserve to bail him out. So
Zaire's economic crisis would mark the beginning of the end for Mobutu's regime. With more and more citizens having nothing to lose, various opposition groups began demanding an end to Mobutu's one-party system. But despite Zaire's democratic deficits and deep economic crisis, Mobutu's government continued to receive firm support from the US and its allies. Through its close relationships with US Presidents Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush, Mobutu skillfully maintained the support of the US and other Western powers by promoting the idea that a regime change in Congo would plunge the country back into the chaos of the 60s and enable the Soviet Union to gain a foothold in Central Africa.
President Mobutu and I have had the opportunity to review and renew one of our oldest and most solid friendships in Africa, that between the United States and the Republic of Zaire. Cooperation between the United States and Zaire under President Mobutu's leadership stretches back through 20 years and 5 United States administrations. In that time, American leaders have learned to place a particularly high value on President Mobutu's insights and counsel. President Mobutu has brought a consistent voice of good sense and goodwill to the international councils where African issues are considered, from the United Nations to the Organization of African Unity to the non-aligned movement. He has stood uniformly for the peaceful settlements of disputes.
yeah, shout out to Distant Lights. He says Mobutu still was making smart moves, playing the Western powers like this wasn't something most dictators could do. Yeah. No, he was. I mean, I never take away from his intelligence. The issue is, you know, he just didn't care about the people. And in order to be a great leader, it's not just about playing different countries against each other in order for your personal gain. It's about enriching your country and leaving something, you know, some type of memorabilia, infrastructure, business, monuments, increasing the GDP, you know, minimizing the debt, you know, increasing exports and whatnot, and facilitating trade with other countries. And I mean, as far as the Congo is, I mean, it's destitute right now, and there's plenty of natural resources. There's still an abundance of natural resources, but because of his lack of, you know, implementing a system for his people and future leaders to inherit, he pretty much fumbled the wealth of the country.
Disputes, but has not shrunk from his responsibilities when action was appropriate.
And yeah, I mean, somebody, Acadia makes a good point. The West needed him at that time as well. The Soviet Union was expanding. Yeah, so he was being played as a pawn, and he was only being protected as long as he was needed.
But while Mobutu's diplomatic prowess enabled him to keep his growing number of domestic enemies at bay throughout the 80s, the end of the Cold War at the start of the 1990s would mean that the old Mobutu or chaos argument no longer held as much weight with the US and its allies. After over 25 years of unyielding support, Mobutu's Western friends suddenly began calling for him to engage with the opposition and consider making Zaire a multi-party democracy. In an emotional address, Mobutu publicly announced that he would be stepping down as leader of the NPR, and he commissioned a national conference in which opposition groups would be allowed to speak freely in a public discussion about Zaire's political future. But to his shock and horror, the national conference descended into nothing more than a public denouncement of Mobutu's regime.
So they were...
Mobutu n'a jamais élaboré une pensée philosophique et cohérente à mesure de sous-tendre un système politique.
So he never established a political philosophy for his heirs to inherit. He said to lies was added the practice of moral and material corruption, nepotism and cronyism, and the multiple faces of the head of state himself. Founding president Guide Elmsman, father of the nation, marshal, etc., etc.
Père de la nation, maréchal, etc., etc.
Je demande à la Commission de présenter ses excuses pour cette dithyrambe qui est à la limite de la négociation.
So by the end of his reign, the African people were not fucking with him, the Congolese people.
As the conference continued, prominent opposition leaders began publicly denouncing Mobutu's regime in front of large crowds, and thousands took to the streets in public protest of the Mobutu regime. In response to the protests, Mobutu suspended the national conference and deployed troops to violently quash the demonstrations.
So obviously, he's trying to quell dissent and quell backlash against his regime. Obviously failed.
With the economy in tatters and most Zairians having nothing more to lose, Mobutu's violent crackdowns only led to more protests. But with the Cold War now ended, Mobutu's Western partners had no incentive to come to his aid, and so Mobutu was forced to flee the country's capital of Kinshasa to take up hiding in his presidential villa deep in the forests of Badolite. With Mobutu in hiding, the capital was plunged into total chaos with outbreaks of rioting and looting by angry mobs who sensed that the entire country was about to collapse. And just like his regime, Mobutu's body was also under siege. Right in the middle of all the political chaos, Mobutu was diagnosed with prostate cancer and had to travel to Switzerland for treatment. With Mobutu at his lowest point, an insurgency led by rebel leader Laurent Désiré Kabila, which was sponsored by Mobutu's longtime enemies Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and Rwanda's Paul Kagame, marched from the east to the west of Zaire to formally overthrow Mobutu's government. No longer propped up by his Western friends, Mobutu's army could hardly resist Kabila's insurgents. And after failed peace talks in May 1997, Mobutu was eventually overthrown by Kabila and forced to spend the rest of his life in exile.
So there he go with Nelson Mandela.
A sick and disheartened man, Mobutu died in Morocco a few months after his overthrow. But even in death, the system Mobutu created will live on for many years to come. Just like his predecessor, Laurent Désiré Kabila renamed the country, changed its flag and national anthem, and made grandiose promises of a glorious future. But in terms of actual substance, Kabila's rule did nothing to bring peace and prosperity to the Congolese people. And so even 2 decades after the end of both Mobutu and Kabila's regimes, the DRC remains one of the poorest and most unstable countries in the world.
So there you have it. Still one of the poorest and most unstable countries in the world. I ain't gonna lie, you fuck around and take 20,000 niggas to Congo, you could probably take that bitch over right now. I ain't even gonna cap in 2023. I know I said it in jest earlier, but shit. I mean, you get the right niggas and, you know.
Despite its infinitely valuable natural resources. From greedy and self-interested foreign powers to passionate but naive ideologues, treacherous politicians, and a deeply divided people. The story of the DRC so far has been a melancholic intersection of flawed characters and unfortunate events.
All right, so we're gonna go into Patrice Lumumba and that whole story, and then we're gonna close out. So let's get into it.
On 30 June 1960, as he sat listening to King Baudouin of Belgium deliver his address to the assembled dignitaries in Leopoldville on the Congo's Independence Day, the new Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, became increasingly agitated, scribbling notes furiously. The King's speech was full of patronizing remarks. Without showing any form of remorse, King Baudouin praised Belgium's colonial record, singling out the contribution made by his great-uncle, Leopold II. In his speech, the king unashamedly declared, "The independence of the Congo is the crowning of the work conceived by the genius of King Leopold II, undertaken by him with firm courage and continued by Belgium with perseverance." Having been excluded from the official program, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba rose to deliver a tirade against Belgium, denouncing at length the terrible suffering and exploitation that the Congolese people had experienced under Belgian colonial rule. Lumumba's speech was warmly applauded by the Congolese present, but the Belgians were outraged and King Baudouin was not amused. In delivering this speech, Patrice Lumumba merely confirmed the suspicions of the Belgian government that he was an enemy of Belgian interests in the region. Just 6 months later, Patrice Lumumba was imprisoned and tragically murdered aged only 35. This is the story of Patrice Lumumba, an African hero and Congo's first prime minister, whose reputation inspired hope for independence throughout Africa in the 20th century. A tall, thin man with lots of charisma and great oratory powers, but a volatile temperament, Patrice Emery Lumumba was born in Kasai province in the Congo in 1925. The young boy began attending missionary schools at age 11. Most missionary schools' primary objective was to prepare Africans for manual labor, and only 1 hour per day was given to actual study, with the rest dedicated to farming and other physical work. But Patrice Lumumba was different. His teachers at the missionary responded to his deep desire for knowledge and his inquisitive nature by lending him books to read before dark, as his family was too poor to afford a candle for him to read by. Patrice Lumumba was known for being a vocal, precocious young man, and his outspoken nature would come to define his life and career. Growing up, the young Lumumba was told about the horrific tales of atrocities committed in the Congo at the hands of Belgian soldiers under King Leopold II. King Leopold II had ruled the territory as his fiefdom, and he employed the explorer Henry Morton Stanley as his agent. Leopold II exploited the Congo with such ruthless brutality that, following the revelations of endless mutilations and other atrocities, the Belgian parliament finally, in the year 1908, deprived him of control and turned his territory into a colony. Anyways, Patrice Lumumba left school at age 18, and it has been suggested that it was because his father could no longer afford school fees. After leaving school, he went in search of work, first to Kindu, a mining town, then to Kalima, where he worked as a nursing assistant. In 1944, Patrice Lumumba set out for Kasai's second largest city, Stanleyville, now Kisangani. In this big city, Lumumba was dazzled by the cosmopolitan and European areas, its wide boulevards, swimming pools, skyscrapers, and luxurious villas. However, the city's restaurants, theaters, and hotels were off-limits to Africans who were relegated to the backseats of buses and boats and were not permitted to live within city limits. While Lumumba was unable to take advantage of many of the city's amenities, he was able to use the township library in Mangopo where he lived. Lumumba took a course to improve his French and learned several Congolese languages, including Swahili, as well as the Lingala language. In 1947, because he was fluent in Congolese languages, Patrice Lumumba got a job as a postal worker in the capital city of Leopoldville, nearly 1,000 miles down the Congo River, but he was transferred back to Stanleyville in 1950. Back in Stanleyville, Lumumba surrounded himself with Congolese intellectuals. Together, this group of intellectuals debated issues, listened to the news on the radio, and exchanged books. In the early 1950s, Lumumba began expressing himself in editorials and poems.
So, I mean, it's obvious how important education played a role into the freedom of the Congolese people, led by Patrice Lumumba. But at the same time, you know, he had that book smart, but he didn't have that street smarts.
He wrote for Voice of the Congo and La Croix du Congo, two Evolue publications. The Evolue were the upper strata of the middle class, the highest level indigenous Congolese could attain in the Belgian colony.
So remember the Evolues, that is basically like the Uncle Toms of the Congo, basically Belgian or colonialist sympathizers who may have, you know, been formally educated or brought in through the Catholic Church or whatnot. So these are these are the guys who would be considered Uncle Toms or sellouts or coons or whatnot in our day and age, or if we kind of juxtapose this with antebellum slavery, these are the guys who would be, you know, the house Negroes or whatnot.
Through these writings, Patrice Lumumba became known as one of only a dozen Congolese in a country of 13 million who dared to express himself. Patrice Lumumba became an Evolue in 1954, at a time when he believed in Western values and had not yet become critical of Belgian colonialism. In 1955, when King Baudouin of Belgium and his minister for the colonies visited the Congo, Lumumba's prestige rose when he had talks with them. The king drew Patrice Lumumba aside to discuss the future of the Congo. However, his newly found status made him bitter enemies among both the Belgian administrators and some locals in the Congo. As a result, from 1956 onwards, the colonial administration kept him under constant surveillance. In 1956, the young Lumumba was invited by the government to visit Belgium for a study tour, but on his return to the Congo, was arrested on charges of embezzlement. This alleged embezzlement of funds had taken place when he worked in the post office. There is a general belief, however, that these charges against Patrice were trumped up. The authorities were determined to get him out of the way, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison.
So, he is falsely accused, allegedly, of embezzlement. So,
fortunately, the Minister of the Colonies reduced his sentence to 1 year. Patrice Lumumba's term in prison served only to enhance his reputation in the eyes of the nationalists.
And yeah, this is something that the powers that be have learned throughout history, not to make people martyrs, if you will. And if they are made martyrs, they have to be deleted by their own people, as we see with like the Malcolm X situation. I think is a big example of how you don't want to make somebody a martyr, but if they are killed, then you obviously leave some confusion and some what's the word that I'm looking for? You create confusion, but then you also bring that threat from inward, so that whatever agenda that you have can be played out. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching.
While in prison, Lumumba considered his status as an evilware and made a radical shift towards Pan-Africanism and Congolese nationalism. The notion of nationalism enabled different ethnic groups that made up the Congolese society to come together and fight against colonial economic exploitation.
Yeah, shout out to Acadia. He says plausible I don't know why I can't talk. Plausible deniability. Yeah, it's been a long night.
Political repression and cultural oppression. Upon his release, Patrice Lumumba moved to the capital, Leopoldville, where he worked as a salesman for a local brewery. Political activity in Leopoldville at the time was beginning to stir. News of Ghana's independence in 1957 and the growing momentum in neighboring French colonies towards African rule provided a new stimulus for the people in the Congo to fight colonialism. The first organized movement came from a tribal organization called Abako. Abako was originally founded by Bakongo leaders to promote use of the Kikongo language, but the organization now began to make overt political demands. Abako's leader, Joseph Kasavubu, set his sights on reuniting the Bakongo people divided by the boundaries of the Belgian Congo, the French Congo, and Angola. Joseph Kasavubu also sought to rebuild the old Congo kingdom that had last flourished in the 16th century. Abako established a strong political base among the Bakongo living in Leopoldville and the Lower Congo region. Another party later appeared, and it was called Konakat. The party was led by Moise Chombe, a shrewd politician who was the son of a wealthy businessman from Katanga. Konakat favored provincial autonomy for Katanga and worked closely with Belgian groups pursuing the same interests, and also advocated continuing ties with Belgium. Patrice Lumumba chose a different path. In 1958, he joined a group of other young evaluators to launch the Congolese national movement, the MNC, to rally support on a national basis. Only Lumumba's MNC stood out as a champion of Congolese nationalism. It was the first all-Congolese political party based not on ethnicity or based on region, but for the entire country. One very important encounter for Lumumba was when, along with two companions, he was allowed to travel to Accra, Ghana in December of 1958 to attend the All-African People's Conference. At the conference, Patrice had the privilege to address the crowd gathered. As a number of other African nationalists pushing for political independence listened, Lumumba declared, "The winds of freedom currently blowing across all of Africa have not left the Congolese people indifferent. Political awareness, which until very recently was latent, is now becoming manifest and assuming outward expression, and it will assert itself even more forcefully in the months to come. We are thus assured of the support of the masses and of the success of the efforts we are undertaking." Like other delegates that were present at the conference.
Shout out to Lauren out here. She sends a $25 PayPal and appreciates the education.
Hold on. Hello? Where we at? Oh, you want to know where I'm at? We outside!
I appreciate that, Lauren. Thank you for your contribution. And guys, follow suit. Hit the Cash App, hit the PayPal, hit the Super Trap. This channel is completely demonetized, so do what you can to show your support, please.
Patrice Lumumba returned home burning with enthusiasm for the struggle against colonial rule and determined to build the MNC into a mass political movement along the lines of Kwame Nkrumah's CPP. Patrice Lumumba was now hell-bent on fighting for Congolese independence. In January of 1959, the city of Leopoldville was torn by vicious rioting. The immediate cause of the violence was a decision by the local authorities to refuse permission for Kasavubu's Abako to hold a scheduled Sunday afternoon meeting. But further investigations by the Belgians revealed that unemployment, overcrowding, and discrimination had produced a groundswell of frustration and discontent amongst the masses. And so, to help quell the discontent, the Belgian government announced a program of political reform, starting with local government elections. The colonial government also added a vague promise about independence as being the eventual goal of Belgian policy. However, many people felt that these reforms were not enough. More radical nationalists denounced these plans as being too slow and called for a boycott of the proposed municipal and rural elections. Well, the Belgians did not take this lying down, and their repression followed. Belgian repression peaked on 30 October 1959, when the forcible dispersion of an MNC rally in Saint-Léville led to the death of 30 people. Thereafter, Patrice Lumumba was imprisoned on a charge of inciting riots. Following all of this, Congo descended into chaos. There was disorder and violence in other key areas of the country, and the Belgian authorities found it difficult to suppress. Over the next few months, the Congolese felt empowered to resist. They tested the Belgian administrators, daring them to punish the colonized people. In the Lower Congo, the Bakongo refused to pay taxes and to abide by the administrative regulations. More disturbances occurred in Saint-Léville, and when King Baudouin visited the city in December of 1959, the mob of demonstrators that greeted him at the airport had to be dispersed with tear gas. Pressure was increasingly piling on Belgium, and so it felt obliged to hasten the process of independence for the Congo. A conference was convened for all Congolese political parties, and they were to meet in Brussels in January of 1960. Lumumba's MNC refused to take part without him being present, and it was soon obvious to the Belgians that the conference would not succeed without Lumumba being there. And so Patrice Lumumba was released from prison, and he arrived in Brussels on 26 January 1960. At the conference, only Patrice Lumumba insisted upon a single Congo, while Moise Tshombe, whose power base was the mineral-rich Katanga province, proposed an independent Congo made up of a loose federation of semi-autonomous provinces. At this conference, provincial and national elections were set for May of 1960, with Congo eventually gaining independence in June of that year. The elections themselves were a true testament of how divided the Congo was.
Shout out to Acadia with the $10 Cash App. I really appreciate it and appreciate your participation in this stream.
Oh, say less.
Oh, I think I overlooked. Oh no, that was Thursday. My bad.
Of the 137
But anyway, shout out to Denzel for the $50 Cash App he sent on Thursday. I really appreciate that.
That were up for grabs on the National Assembly, the PSA party won 13 seats, Kasavubo's Abaco with 12 seats, Konakat with 8, and Lumumba's MNC with a majority of 33 seats. The rest of the seats went to over a dozen smaller parties. Lumumba tried unsuccessfully to unite with Tshombe's Konakat, as did Kasavubo. Finally, on 23 June 1960, Patrice Lumumba and Joseph Kasavubo allied to form a unified government of Congo, with Kasavubo as president and Lumumba as prime minister. On Independence Day, attended by the king of the Belgians, King Baudouin, the new prime minister, Lumumba, considered himself and the Congolese people as being utterly disrespected when he was not scheduled to speak at the formal ceremony handing over power on 30 June 1960. Following the patronizing speech by King Baudouin that I alluded to earlier, in which he praised Belgium's great civilizing mission in the Congo, Lumumba defied protocol and made a radical speech in reply, in which he castigated the brutality and injustice of Belgian rule in the Congo. In his independence speech, Lumumba also said, and I quote, "We are going to show the world what the black man can do when he works in freedom, and we are going to make of the Congo the center of the sun's radiance for all of Africa. We are going to keep watch over the lands of our country so that they truly profit their children."
So, obviously he had, high intentions for the African Free State of Congo, or Republic of Congo, whatever you want to call it. But obviously that didn't pan out to what he was looking for. And now we're kind of seeing the ramifications of that, which I'm going to show you guys right after this video. Well, we might not even get through this whole video. But let's keep going.
The official lunch which followed the ceremony was delayed for 2 hours, while King Baudouin and his ministers debated whether to boycott it and fly back at once to Belgium. When the lunch eventually took place, it was cold and disorganized. The country that Lumumba and Kasavubo inherited was by any standard ill-prepared for independence. Except at a local level, no Congolese had acquired any experience of government or parliamentary life. In the top ranks of the civil servants, no more than 3 Congolese out of an establishment of 1,400 held posts, and 2 of those had been recently appointed. Moreover, prior to the handover of government authorities, the Belgians had produced a new constitution that assigned to 6 provincial governments the same competencies as those of the central government. This arrangement was an invitation for an immediate power struggle between the provinces and the central government. And for sure, such a power struggle duly erupted within days of the country's independence. The honeymoon for Congo and for Patrice Lumumba, if he even had any, was short-lived. It was only a few days after independence before the first disaster struck. Here, among the ranks of the Force Publique, the Congo's army, resentment over low pay and lack of promotion had been simmering for months. The soldiers contrasted their own dire living conditions and bleak prospects with the sudden wealth and influence of civilian politicians, former clerks and salesmen, who were now driving around in large cars and spending money freely. The members of the Force Publique were also not happy with the slow rate of Africanization or lack thereof that was taking place in this army. While the government was run by Congolese, the army remained under the control of the same 1,100 strong Belgian officers. The command of the Force Publique, General Emile Janssens, only made this situation worse. The general was adamant that there would be no acceleration in the Africanization program. After an incident of indiscipline at an army barrack in Leopoldville on 4 June, General Janssens summoned officers and men on duty at army headquarters and lectured them on the need for absolute obedience. To make his point clear, he wrote on a blackboard the following words: "Before independence is equal to after independence." In response, the soldiers held a protest meeting in the army camp that night, demanding the dismissal of General Janssens. This ended up in a riot. Troops at another garrison were ordered to intervene, but they mutinied and went on a rampage, attacking European civilians. Congo was in crisis. Prime Minister Lumumba had to act, and he publicly accused Belgian officers of fomenting rebellion. He then dismissed General Janssens and other senior officers. In subsequent negotiations with the army, Lumumba decided that the entire officer corps should be replaced by Congolese. Prime Minister Lumumba also appointed Victor Lundula as the new army commander, and as chief of staff, Lumumba chose his trusted personal aide, one Joseph Mobutu, who had spent 7 years in the Force Publique working mainly as a clerk, rising to the rank of Sergeant Major, the highest rank open to Congolese. Amid this war chaos, thousands of Europeans, primarily Belgians, fled, and stories of atrocities against white people surfaced in newspapers around the globe.
Streaming into the little town of Kitwe in northern Rhodesia, just across the border from the Congo, come the refugees, with whatever they could bring, and often bearing marks of the trouble they had getting away. Further north, at the frontier post of Kasumpalesa, families arrive by car and on foot, and even the children are armed.
The great mineral wealth of the Congo meant that a number of Western nations, including the former colonial power Belgium, Britain and France, as well as the United States with the principal motive of Cold War strategy, were not prepared to lose these vast resources, and so they had to act fast. The Belgian government at first tried to persuade Lumumba to permit Belgian troops stationed in the Congo to restore order. But when Lumumba refused, the Belgians unilaterally ordered their forces into action and arranged to fly in reinforcements. As their troops took control of key points like Leopoldville Airport, Patrice Lumumba became convinced that Belgium was trying to reimpose its rule. Well, on 11 June 1960, the crisis escalated even further. With the connivance of Belgium and support of Belgian mining and commercial firms, the Katanga leader Moise Tshombe grasped the opportunity of the chaos to declare Katanga an independent state. Belgian troops were used to disarm and expel Congolese army units from the province. The main purpose of this mission and arrangement was to insulate the province from the disorder and apparent militant nationalism sweeping the rest of the Congo, as well as to safeguard the Western investment there.
All right, guys. So I'm gonna move along because I'm afraid that I'm running out of time. So let's get to the Congo or Zaire today, and this little put together is called Zaire Revisited, Congolese nostalgic for era of dictator Mobutu. So let's listen up. This was put together by France 24. Oh shit, my bad.
Republic of Congo. He came to power in 1965 amid 2 successive coups. He was supported by the former colonial power Belgium and by the US in the ongoing fight against communism. But Mobutu also played the cards of patriotism and national pride. In 1971, he renamed the country Zaire, forced men to wear a new distinctive tunic, and made people choose names of African origin. Then, as the price of commodities collapsed, he nationalized foreign companies. Corruption, then, though, taking hold at every level of the country's administration. Mobutu began to accumulate massive wealth, and he ordered the construction of massive palaces. A whole city rose out of the earth, right in the middle of the tropical jungle, Gabadalite. Mobutu reigns all-powerful.
I have the legitimacy of popular support behind me, which means that I've been elected for 7 years. My mandate will end at midnight on the 4th of December, 1991. I am a candidate for another term after that. I am announcing that, and I'm not afraid to do so.
You'll still be there in the year 2000.
Well, why not? In 2 months, I'll be 60. The year 2000 is 10 years away. Why not?
Well, little by little, though, corruption became endemic and the violent regime slowly began to falter. Long-suffering Zairians fighting back. Weakened by cancer, Mobutu slowly withdrew into his Gbadolite stronghold. In 1997, Mobutu driven from power by the rebellion of Laurent Désiré Kabila, and he died in Morocco just a few months later. Despite, though, 3 decades of violence and oppression, some Congolese still feel a certain nostalgia for the Zaire years. Our reporters Odysse Garcia and Tomina Nicolon revisit the ruins of his palace at Gbadolite for France 24.
It was known as the Versailles of the jungle. On a hill overlooking untouched forest stands the ruins of Kawele. A magnificent 15,000 square meter palace complex, once the favorite home of Mobutu Sese Seko. Those who knew it remember a luxurious, almost surreal place.
There was marble everywhere. It was so shiny, but also slippery.
Today, what remains of the palace's rooms gives us a glimpse of Mobutu's legendary opulence. In this suite, the dictator's remote-controlled bed was once positioned on a cross carved into the rock.
He worked hard. He would get up early and go to bed late at night. At 5:30, he was already up and making phone calls to know the general mood in the country.
God damn. I'm very upset because I know how his residence used to be. Seeing it like this today, it breaks my heart. It was a sumptuous palace, worthy of a great head of state and the great Zaire of the time.
Mahogany doors, marble walls, or crystal chandeliers, Mobutu spared no expense lavishing millions on the complex. It was here that he welcomed heads of states from all over the world.
Belgian King Baudouin and French Presidents Chirac and Mitterrand.
Damn, now that shit's in ruins. Fucking crazy.
Were here. There used to be a pool here and a fountain. When there was a party, people would gather around to eat. At night, it was a beautiful sight.
In May 1997, the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, a rebel group led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, seized power, overthrowing the man who'd become known as a Leopard of Zaire. Kawele estate was subsequently looted and partially destroyed.
Damn. I was there when the shooting happened. Soldiers weren't shooting at close range towards people. They were shooting to scatter the crowd. After that, they would start looting the place. Then they left. But our father Marshal was already gone. It was the end of his reign. He was ill. There was a cargo at the airport. It took him to exile.
One morning, after 32 years of dictatorship, Mobutu fled the country via Gbadolite Airport. He would never return. Today, the airport's control tower is out of service, and soldiers occupy the Chinese pagoda that was once reserved for distinguished guests. During the 1970s, at the peak of the Leopard's reign, the 3,200-meter-long runway could accommodate a Concorde, under the stunned gaze of the town's residents. In 1967, Gbadolite was a tiny village of mud huts. Just a few years after taking power, Mobutu transformed the place into a modern town. With banks, a post office, and even a hydroelectric plant.
I mean, them shits don't look well kept.
An extraordinary feat in this province cut off from the world.
Jesus Christ, look at that shit now.
These days, everything in Gbadolite recalls the days of Mobutu. Buildings frozen in time, witness to years of excessive opulence. Today, the population has taken over several of these unfinished sites, where construction simply stopped dead 21 years ago.
Wow.
Supposed to host an...
Jesus Christ, this shit is fucking insane, bro. These niggas don't even have smart boards. They working on a damn... That ain't even no damn chalkboard. That's he just drawn on the wall at this point. Wow.
National Water Company. This building is now used as a school. where pupils study.
They use that as a school. Jesus Christ, man. I mean, them niggas are getting it out of the mud, literally.
In an unusual setting.
But I mean, it's kind of beautiful.
But some places have escaped the looting, like the luxury Zikele Hotel.
When the marshal was here, there were 3 bars. The pool bar on the other side. This one is the blue bar. People used to come from everywhere. They came from Kinshasa. They came to drink and eat. There was joy. We are currently at the Red Bar. It was a renowned bar at the time of the poor marshal. Even he came here. But because he was the president, he couldn't stay very long. He would have fun for a few minutes and then go home.
But nights of partying are a distant memory. There's no longer electricity to keep the beer cold, nor any clients to drink it.
Damn, so they serving hot beer. Fuck. No electricity, y'all. Wow, man.
In 1988, Mobutu built a fizzy drink bottling factory, producing 80,000 bottles a month. In the end, it could supply half of that, due to the weakness of local purchasing power. 9 years after production started, everything came to a stop.
I mean, imagine taking over this infrastructure in these manufacturing I mean, it's probably inoperable now, but and outdated and need a ton of rehab. But like I said, you come in there, 20,000 loyal niggas, and, you know, build some money up through the industry and using the natural resources. I mean, shit, you can't lose. You just got to be willing to. I mean, you're going to have to kill some niggas. I ain't going to cap. If you were going to do that, you know, I'm not advising or advocating for that, but I'm just saying, like, if you did want to take over the country, then that's kind of how you do it.
But the staff, still there, have been waiting patiently for a new owner for 21 years.
The factory was Marshal Mobutu Sese Seko's initiative. He was the main shareholder. This company gave life to this city, Badolite. He didn't do it to earn money, but so that people would have a job. We still hope that someone will revive the company. We are waiting for a person of goodwill.
I mean, if this isn't an opportunity for Black American, I mean, restoring this manufacturing plant, I guess it's a bottle manufacturing plant. I mean, isn't this a project for a well-seasoned Black American businessman? I mean, right?
Billionaire who would take an interest in investing here. He would be welcome here.
Tarmacked roads.
And they're saying the billionaire will be welcome here, but I mean, if he's white, would y'all really welcome him? Probably not.
In water, electricity, the population of Badolite could once touch the leopard of Zaire's dreams of grandeur. Those who benefited from the apparent prosperity of his rule have struggled to move on.
Marshal Mobutu isn't just anyone. He deserves a mausoleum. He deserves a monument.
So they still dick riding Mobutu. That's crazy.
Originally buried in this chapel, the bodies of Mobutu's family members were moved to this cemetery at the time of the looting. 2 of his sons are buried here, as well as his first wife, Marie Antoinette. The remains of her husband are still in Morocco. Papa Marechal, as the Congolese call him, today inspires a young generation of artists who were only children when the Democratic Republic of Congo was known as Zaire.
La Réunion
We have a duty to remember, to learn from the past, in order to better understand the present. Mobutu's charisma, his posture, his presence, all that made us very proud, but it vanished over time. Mobutu was still there, but his dignity was dying out.
The bustling Congolese capital also got a makeover under Mobutu. Deemed too colonial, Belgian Leopoldville became Kinshasa, a showcase of the new Zaire, known as Kinlabel. The dictator's landmarks reflected his ambition.
Jesus Christ, these buildings are damn near dilapidated.
The imposing Palace of the People, the seat of parliament, and a 210-meter-high tower, visible from anywhere in the city. Kambai Boachia, a historian and Mobutu's former education minister, has come here for the first time since the 1990s.
It's impressive, almost out of proportions. Mobutu had a spirit for greatness. He's a mystical man, and by sanctifying this tower, we sanctify Zaire at the same time. He's Zaire.
On the top floor, a fancy restaurant was supposed to offer views over the capital, but it was never completed.
Damn, that would have been a hit, right? To all types of tourists if they wouldn't have, persecuted and, right? Fucking victimized them.
Professor Boitshia says that Mobutu wanted to better the Congolese people.
Mobutu wanted to give us, the Congolese people, in the heart of Africa, the idea that we could be ourselves. We were no longer colonized. We are not white people. He rallied all Congolese people around this idea. People need to stand out. For that, they needed a proper outfit.
I mean, in making your whole identity based off of not being white is, I understand it based off of the colonization, but I don't think that's a rallying cry to bring unity to your country.
This is a Mao Zedong model with the distinctive Mao collar, and Mobutu loved it. He really loved it.
I'm not really digging it, but to each his own.
And today, when you wear this in Kinshasa, people look at you and they think, how elegant is this man? A real supporter of Mobutu. That's great.
But when in Zaire, do as the Zairians, I guess, right?
Behind the gleaming facade, Mobutu was leading the country to ruin. The absolute ruler shopped, ate, and at times imitated a European lifestyle, increasingly detached from his people, distancing himself further and further from reality. In Kinshasa, as elsewhere, dissident voices were silenced, his opponents tortured and murdered. In 1966, 8 months after his rise to power, Mobutu ordered that 4 politicians be hanged in the stadium, accusing them of plotting against the government. The people had been warned. Under his rule, protests were frequently repressed, often violently.
At this stage, it was getting complicated for the regime. That's when order was given to shoot at close
Damn, this shit is a mess, bro.
range. One of my friends named Muamba was the first victim. When he fell, we realized that the situation was serious. We scattered, and the soldiers kept on shooting randomly. 17 people died on the site.
Students were protesting against the cancellation of meals at the university canteen, a sign that Zaire had to tighten its belt.
He did well when he first came into power, but from 1969 until he left, it was a disaster. When he felt we no longer wanted him, there was no stopping him.
Today, in the middle of a political crisis, some long for Mobutu. In Kinshasa, the Union of Mobutist Democrats are keen to revive the flame.
Marshal Mobutu is the father of our democracy. He was the one who allowed political pluralism back in April 1990.
Yeah, that was because his hand was forced. The only reason he allowed political pluralism is because his hand was forced and the people didn't want his NPR reign anymore. NPR, right? Yeah, NPR reign and fuck. People were done with it. So by then, yeah, he allowed multiple political parties and people to, because he was like, fuck it, I'm out, y'all can figure this shit out. So that wasn't something noble that he did. That was a survival tactic. And now they feel like they're still indebted to him. Like all these Africans are just fucking brainwashed by it. It's absolutely ridiculous. They can't objectively look at his legacy and see it as a failure.
Here, the former dictator is omnipresent, his world-famous hat appearing in every photo. Political and religious leaders once flocked from all over the world to meet the leopard, and Mobutu knew only too well how to charm them before he crossed a red line.
We, the people, started feeling that he was being let down by those who used to call themselves his friends. They were not here for him through the tough times, during his sickness.
Considered to be one of the most ruthless dictators of the 20th century, Mobutu is nonetheless revered by some today in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We tend to create an idealistic image of the former president against a new one. When our current president leaves, the next one will make us idealize him, and so on.
Oh, he understands the game.
The Democratic Republic of Congo will hold a presidential election. The final meetings before the vote are an opportunity for the nostalgic to speak up. Observers.
Yeah, shout out to Distant Lights. He says his propaganda campaign was effective, just like Mao in China. Mao's policies killed like 60 million Chinese, and that's just brushed off. Facts.
They're hoping for a peaceful and democratic handover of power in Central Africa's biggest country, where the spectre of Mobutu continues to hover.
Horace Garcia and Tom Nicholas.
Damn, man. I mean, what a fucking waste. Well, you know, if it's crazy. It's crazy what this country has become. And we pretty much started from colonialist Congo to now what we understand as, I guess, Mobutu Zaire and back to the Congo. And I mean, many changes in this area. And I mean, that was a really interesting history lesson. A lot of books that we have bookmarked and added to our Amazon wish list that we're going to have to check out and read. So we got a lot of value out of the stream. Well, I did at least. And shit, I guess I'm narrating this shit or hosting this shit. So I got a lot of value. I hope you guys did too. I love spending time with you guys and delving into these very intricate, difficult historical topics, but especially when it comes to Africa, but it needs to be addressed. But as far as this series goes, I'm going to try and keep it up on YouTube as long as possible to direct you guys to the Patreon. But eventually this video will be taken down and only exclusively on Patreon. So make sure you subscribe to the Patreon, or however you follow the Patreon, whatever, I don't know how the terminology, but check out the Patreon. Make sure you're subscribed there. And to my other channels and my backup channel, BGZM News 17. But yeah, guys, make sure you leave a comment under the stream immediately after the stream. That really helps the algorithm. Hit the Cash App, hit the PayPal if you found some value. We learned the difference between vibranium and uranium. So that was very fun to do. And I'm happy to be corrected on anything that I get wrong, or if I misstate something or misspell or mispronounce. I'm happy to be corrected. So guys, don't think that I'm one of these evil African kings who is infallible and thinks that my shit don't stink, because you can definitely tell me that I'm wrong. I will take it in and take in the constructive criticism. But I do want to know you guys' perspective and opinions on this topic. So make sure you hit the comment section right after this. Make sure that it's respectful. And we will continue this series. This is a conclusion of Evil African Kings, Part 2, Mobutu Sese Seko, the corrupt kleptocratic Congolese tyrant. So make sure you guys, continue to follow the series. And whenever I start on my research on Evil African Kings Part 3, tune into that. It's going to be a great ride. I'm going to do, it's going to be a 54-part series. So I can't wait to have you guys, along the ride with me. So you already know what it is, man. It's your boy, the Black Gen Z Mindset, aka Janquavius Jackson, aka BGZM News 17, and we are going to send it to Janquavius Jackson as always to take us away. Guys, leave a comment immediately after the stream, like the video, share the video, hit that Cash App, hit that PayPal, and subscribe to the Patreon, because that is where the Evil African King series will be uploaded ultimately. And I am going to keep this up on YouTube as long as possible, but if not, you guys know where to find the stream. But anyways, you already know what it is. Peace out. Love. Stay safe. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Happy 4th, too. Happy 4th. Enjoy your long weekend. Stay away from the community because y'all know bodies be dropping on the 4th of July weekend. But anyways, peace.
Yo, what's the BGZM News 17 family? I'm at the corner of Jesse Jackson and Marcus Garvey, and I got some bad news for you. As you can see, I lost my job. I'm out here living in cardboard boxes outside of boarded up vacant homes. YouTube said I'm done getting money out here in these streets. They even took my funky ass suit. So anything right now would help. So go ahead and hit that Cash App, hit that PayPal, hit that GoFundMe. Hell, cop the merch. Or if you want to make the long-term commitment to the Jinquavius Jackson Fund, join the Patreon so that I can continue to put out top-notch content each and every day. Also, check out the Rumble, where there is absolutely no censorship. Link in the description box below.
Hey, yo, ain't that nigga Jinquavius? Yo, I recognize.
No, that's not me no more.
Hey, yo, run your pocket.
Y'all killing me with this shit.
Do the opposite of Antonio Brown and take
What
all your
more do you want from me?
Aw, look at Daddy.
He's not my dad, Mom.
Really, Ava?
He's not. My dad's in jail and I miss him.
Gang violence and other kind of violence.
So it is what it is.